The 2019 election campaign is underway. In a world of constant surprise and deepening uncertainty, Canadians will elect a new parliament on October 21st. And tonight, Maclean's and Citytv are bringing you the first national leaders debate of the 2019 campaign, now with 25% fewer leaders. We've invited the leaders of the same four parties we invited the last time you saw me here in 2015. Three of them accepted. Elizabeth May, the leader of the Green Party; Andrew Scheer, leader of the Conservative Party; and Jagmeet Singh, leader of the New Democratic Party. We also invited Justin Trudeau, the leader of the Liberal Party. He declined, which is absolutely his right. We left the invitation and his podium open right up to airtime. Why have a debate without him? Because in Canada we elect parliaments, not presidents. Every major party can influence the next 4 years, and every party has a case to make and to defend. And in Canada, the right to ask questions is never bestowed by some authority. It belongs to everybody. Tonight's format is simple. The night's divided into 4 issue areas: the economy, Indigenous issues, energy and the environment, and foreign affairs. I'll ask each leader a question on each issue. That leader will have a minute to respond before we open the floor for a free-flowing debate. All leaders have agreed that I can intervene at any time to follow up, ask new questions, or clarify where appropriate. So let's begin with our first issue, the economy. City News reporter Janella Massa sets the stage for us.
Canada's jobless rate is at near record lows. Wages are on the rise. Borrowing money remains cheap. But Canadians are still feeling squeezed.
We will not accept our services being shut down.
In our biggest cities, a hot housing market has made it hard to scrape together a down payment or pay the rent. Never mind saving for retirement or paying for tuition. Meanwhile, many with well-paying manufacturing jobs are nervous.
It's scary. I picture a closure of the plant within 3 to 4 years.
And there are fears recession is around the corner. How will Canada weather another downturn while still carrying large deficits and paying off debt from the last one?
As a business owner, we want to see control over the budget. I understand there has to be spending, but who lives beyond their means all the time?
At the local Rotary Club meeting in Toronto's Scarborough Agincourt riding, the economy is top of mind.
They promised that the deficit would be controlled, and then the number that they projected was really small, which surprised me. But within a couple of months, it was totally overboard, and that is really money out of each individual person's pocket.
Many of the members in this potential swing riding are business owners themselves, worried about how federal decisions will impact the futures of their industries.
My concern is the fluctuation in tariffs and the different things going on with the different countries that are somewhat outside of the control of the Canadian government. We haven't signed the free trade yet. We need to get some stuff done in order for our customers to feel confident that to go ahead with their business plans for the future.
And we're here with the members of the Rotary Club to watch tonight's debate. After we hear from the party leaders, we'll check in with them and get some reaction and hear what they thought of what the leaders had to say.
And the first question on the economy goes to Elizabeth May of the Green Party. Ms. May, your economic ideas aren't widely known. You've called for a guaranteed livable income for every Canadian. Now, the Parliamentary Budget Officer reported in 2018 that a similar guaranteed basic income program would cost $43 billion a year on top of the cost of the existing programs it would replace. Is that realistic?
Yeah, hey, Paul, let me just do a shout out to my fellow Rotarians who are watching, and I pledge to abide by the 4-way test at all times, should I become Prime Minister or in the rest of my political life. Our plans are very realistic. We have submitted our budget and our plans to the Parliamentary Budget Office. Our planks are being costed. In the case of guaranteed livable income, it's a project that will take some years to bring into place because we need to negotiate with every municipality and the provinces. We need to set the guaranteed livable income at a level which is indeed livable. And we know that across this country, that's a different measure. But we'll be able to wrap up and end the programs. Now, the Parliamentary Budget Office is only looking at the costs with the programs that they identified. There are other programs that PBL missed in that analysis, plus the benefits to our healthcare system would be enormous. The reduction of basically housing people in the most expensive housing possible, which is in penitentiaries, $100,000 a year per prisoner, instead of making sure that we invest early in eliminating poverty in this country. We can afford to do it. We can't afford not to.
Okay, thank you for that, Ms. May. Andrew Scheer, does that sound good to you?
Well, you know, when you're talking about adding tens of billions of dollars, $43 billion to the cost of government, that all comes from somewhere. That comes from the economy. That means that there is less prosperity and less growth, less economic activity that lifts people out of poverty. And in the preamble to the question, we heard a lot about the effect of that deficit. And we've seen what long-term permanent deficits have done to this country in the past. Justin Trudeau promised that the budget would be balanced, that the budget would balance itself this year. Instead, we see massive deficits as far as the eye can see, years into the future. That puts a huge strain on our social services like healthcare and education, and it means that right after the election, he will raise your taxes when he doesn't need your money, but he still needs your vote. Conservatives are focused on creating economic growth. That is what truly lifts people out of poverty.
Sure. I mean, we heard from what's going on in Canada. We know that people are struggling. I meet people every day that are worried about the future. They tell me that they're not sure if they're going to be able to make ends meet. I've met moms who are struggling because they're worried about if they can provide for their kids. I met seniors who can't afford the medication they need. And really, it all comes down to one thing. Governments in Ottawa, whether they've been conservative or in this case, particularly with Mr. Trudeau, the Liberals, governments have always made decisions that seems to make life easier for the richest and hardest for everyone else. And we've got to change that. That's why we believe in investing in people, making sure we build a healthcare system that includes medication coverage for all, that we make sure that seniors never have to worry about the cost of medication, that young families don't have to worry about the cost of finding a home.
If I could just correct you on one point.
I'm
The
not sure you
previous
can.
Conservative government, our tax cuts overwhelmingly benefited low and middle income Canadians. Under Justin Trudeau, life has become less affordable. It's harder and harder
Let's
for
talk
people
about
to
those
get
tax
ahead.
cuts. We know that with tax cuts, Mr. Scheer's tax cuts, what they mean is tax cuts for the wealthiest,
in wages,
but that means
for
cuts
low
to
and middle
families
income
that are struggling.
If I can go
That's what
back
it
to
means.
where you started, Andrew, you're right. We have to find money for these things. That's why the PBO is costing a platform that for us includes increasing taxes on the wealthy, eliminating the loopholes that overwhelmingly only benefit the top 1%, stock option loopholes, capital gains, the ways in which we deal with money in this country. We can actually find much more revenue. We don't tax Google or Facebook. They
No, that
take
makes sense, Ms.
billions
May.
out of this
But I
economy.
wanna just
We
touch
can
on-
raise the corporate tax
I
rate
hear
to
you.
21%.
I want to touch on one thing that Mr. Scheer just pointed out, that he said he was going to cut taxes. He would certainly cut taxes. There's no question about that. He would cut taxes for the wealthy,
That's
and he
just
would
not
cut
true.
services
That's
for
just not true.
families.
That
That is
is just not
exactly what
true.
conservatives
We
do.
have made-
We've
we have
seen it
made
here
a-
in, well, just let me finish my point. We've seen it here in Ontario. Mr. Ford promised to cut taxes. He did. He cut taxes for the wealthiest, and then he cut services
have
for
made-
families. Autism
I have
funding,
made- I have
education
made a
funding,
firm commitment.
all the things that families
Mr.
rely
Singh,
on, he
with all
cut.
due respect,
Mr.
I
Scheer.
have made a firm commitment that under a conservative government, I will ensure that funding for healthcare and social services continues to increase. But those services are threatened. If you want to talk about Ontario, we can see that Justin Trudeau is trying to do to Canada what Kathleen Wynne and the Liberals did to Ontario when they ran massive deficits that put strains on our public services and led to higher taxes.
But if we're going to
Under
act for
that
health-
type of program, our federal government will find it harder and harder to fund those programs. And the only way to pay for that is through higher taxes,
Mr.
which will
Scheer,
make
But we
life
have to bring
less
in
affordable.
universal
It will make
pharmacare. It's the
life-
best way
life
to
less
reduce
affordable.
costs in
Your
our
cuts
healthcare
are gonna hurt
system.
The only way to
and
help
we've seen
people
that
get
again and
ahead,
again.
the only way to help people get ahead is to leave more money in
It's
their
not to
pockets.
cut
That
We
comes
need
services,
from
services
a government
not to cut
and
that lives within
infrastructure
its means.
investment. And we
Okay, I think
really
we're gonna-
we need 100% universal pharmacare. That's the best way to control healthcare costs.
Well, we've started a pretty good debate tonight already. Let's go to our second question. This one's for Andrew Scheer, the leader of the Conservative Party. And all the issues that you have raised in the last few minutes are going to come up later in the debate. Mr. Scheer, new Conservative governments in two large provinces this year, Alberta and Ontario, have discovered worse than expected deficits requiring bigger than expected spending cuts. If your new Conservative government were to discover the same situation at the federal level, would you cut spending or push back your target for a balanced budget? And if you'd cut, what would you cut?
Well, I'm confident that we will not have to encounter those scenarios because we are going to have a fully costed platform that will show Canadians how we will get back to balanced budgets over a responsible period of time, 5 years, which will allow us to maintain increases in important services like healthcare and education. We will run a government that lives within its means so that we stop borrowing money, We see more and more of Canadian taxpayers' dollars going just to pay the interest rate on that debt. Under Justin Trudeau, tens of billions of dollars have been added to the debt, and that means more and more of your hard-earned dollar is going to pay banks and bondholders for that debt. By getting back to balanced budgets, we can lower taxes, put more money in your pocket so that you can get ahead. That is what this election is all about. Who do you trust to make life more affordable and help you get ahead? Our plan will do exactly that.
With all due respect, I didn't hear an answer from Andrew.
Mr. Singh goes first, and then we'll open it up.
Sure. Thank you very much, Paul. Let's be really clear. When Conservatives talk about cuts to taxes, they're going to cut services. That's exactly what they do. Here in Ontario, people have felt it. They felt the cuts. Those who are most vulnerable are seeing their services cut. Kids who are living with autism, their services have been cut. What we believe is that Mr. Trudeau, same thing. He believes that the priority should be making life easier for the wealthiest. I believe it has to be different, and we can do it differently. We need to invest in families. Our plan is by 2020 to expand our healthcare system to include medication coverage for all. I met a 10-year-old kid, and he told me that he lived with chronic illness, and he wasn't worried about his chronic illness. He was worried about how much his medication cost his mom and dad. A 10-year-old kid felt like a burden. I want that 10-year-old kid to know that with our plan, he will not feel like a burden.
The fact of the matter is Conservatives in the past have got Canada back to balanced budgets while maintaining historic increases in investments for healthcare and education. That is our track record, and that is our commitment going into the future.
Ms. May actually has a point. The question was, in the event of a surprise, which priority goes first? Do you push back a balanced budget, or do you cut deeper than you would have
We have made a commitment to get back to balanced budgets over 5 years. We are going to control the rate of growth of government spending. That is how we are going to get back to balanced budgets. We have seen record levels of spending. We're going to maintain those levels. We're also going to eliminate wasteful Liberal spending, like the $250 million that Justin Trudeau sent the Asian Infrastructure Bank to build roads and bridges in other countries. We're going to repatriate that money, and that's how we're going to get back to balanced budgets. We're going to do it at the same time as increasing healthcare and education transfers. I have been very clear on that. That is a firm commitment.
Elizabeth,
so that we can lower taxes and put more money in the pockets of Canadians.
Okay, by coincidence, Mr. Scheer and the Green Party have the same target for balanced budgets. Within 5 years, we have a lot of revenue coming in from new streams, including putting a surcharge on banks' profits, bringing in higher taxes on large transnational corporations, and many others that will be in our platform. But if I were faced with the choice that you just put to us, I would not cut spending and services. We need to massively expand services. We need 100% universal pharmacare. Jagmeet's right. We have to bring in pharmacare. We're the only country that has universal health care that doesn't have pharmacare. And we need to eliminate tuition so our kids can get a good start, or at any age, improve your education, experience the best you can be, and we need to fund post-secondary education much more significantly do now.
You put budget balance well back in your list of priorities.
It's not ideological.
Okay.
We aim to live within our means.
It's clear families are struggling right now. We recently heard that nearly half of Canadians are just $200 away from not being able to pay their bills.
Because Justin Trudeau's made life less
Mr.
affordable.
Trudeau is going to make, or Mr. Trudeau has already made life more unaffordable. He's promised a lot and not delivered. He's hurt families by neglecting. Mr. Scheer is going to do even worse. He's going to promise you a couple extra dollars in your pocket, but it's going to hurt because he's going to cut all the services you depend on.
That's just not
we
true.
believe in investing in those services. We know what Conservatives do. We've seen them do it in Alberta. We've seen them do it in Ontario. Mr. Scheer is going to do the same thing. What we believe is, why don't we tackle one of the biggest concerns people are faced with, and that's the housing crisis. To do that, we need to tackle speculators and money laundering, but it also means we've got to invest in building homes, quality homes, and we're committed to building 500,000 new homes across this country.
The issue is that when times are good, that is the time to pay down debt so that there's more flexibility. There are some very troubling signs on the horizon that Canada may be heading into some difficult periods. And unlike the previous Conservative government that paid down debt to give us flexibility, that allowed us to be the last into recession and the first one out, we are going to hit those difficult times in a very difficult position without that type of flexibility. That increased debt costs taxpayers. It means more of your hard-earned dollars is going to pay banks and bondholders. We want to get back to balanced budget so that we can put that money back into services and find new ways to lower your taxes.
It's funny that you mentioned that, Mr. Scheer, because your government in the past has consistently benefited the wealthiest. It has not worked for people. Mr. Trudeau has done the same thing. Mr. Trudeau continues
the most
to
from our
make
tax cuts.
decisions
That is a
benefit
fact that
the
comes
people
from
at
the
very top.
parliamentary budget
I didn't cut you
officer.
off while you were talking. The people at the very
I
top,
didn't say things that aren't
people
true.
at the very top continue to be benefited by Mr. Trudeau and by Mr. Scheer. What we need to do is make
not
laws
true.
and make rules that actually help people out.
No,
We've got to
we
put people at the heart of
we
our
need a-
decisions.
we
We
need a
know the
tax
Conservatives
commission to
aren't going to do
establish-
that. Mr. Trudeau certainly hasn't done it. He hasn't shown up for 4 years for people. He hasn't shown up today for the
we
debate.
haven't had
What
a
we need
tax
to do is
commission
stand
to-
up for the people. Let's take on the powerful interests.
I think
that
that's
make
something we can all
I
decisions.
agree
think we
on.
Let's
need
take
to
on big
examine our
telecom.
whole
I think I
tax
found-
code.
I think
It
I'm
has
going to cut in
become
here.
I think I found some
unsustainable.
consensus.
Our tax code is
A
so
consensus?
confusing.
I think
I
I
want to
found-
hear that. Andrew Scheer, what's the consensus?
I think I found some consensus. I think we can all agree that Justin Trudeau is afraid of his record, and that's why he's not here tonight. He has
can agree
made
on
life
that. Might
more
be the only thing
expensive
we agree on, but
and
we'll
missing
agree on
out
that.
the
Well, we
economy.
can agree
Well,
on
I'm glad
that.
we agree on the hard points.
We can now sing Kumbaya and keep going.
The next question is for Jagmeet Singh. Mr. Singh, you're promising a huge expansion of healthcare in Canada, a so-called head-to-toe approach that would include dental care, pharmacare, eye care, home care, long-term care, all written into the Canada Health Act. How long will that take, and how will the limited tax increases in the NDP platform cover the cost of all that?
It's about choices, Paul. We'd make different choices. We look at some of the decisions that Mr. Trudeau has made over the past year. He gave $14 billion away to the wealthiest corporations so they could buy corporate jets and limousines. He bought a pipeline for $4.5 billion. That's almost $20 billion that he committed to the wealthiest and the most powerful. We'd make different choices. I think about a young woman that I met in London. Her name is Jessica. She's a single mom. She's pregnant, and she's got medication that she cannot afford. And I think about what she's going through, and I say, she shouldn't have to worry about the cost of medication on top of the other fears she has. So what we want to do is bring in universal medication coverage for all in 1 year. By 2020, we're going to sit down with all the premiers across this country and say to them, when it comes down to your health care, with the same amount that you're spending right now, we'll back that up with $10 billion to fund every single person in your province. We know that unlike Mr. Scheer, who says 95% of Canadians are covered, they're not. We're going to cover you because we're in it for you.
Elizabeth
Yeah.
May, I saw you nodding.
Well, I agree with Jagmeet about universal pharmacare. It's essential. We can't afford not to do it. But I am troubled by the numbers because we try in the Greens support working towards coverage of dental. But when we went to PBO 4 years ago to check out the costs, it came to $30 billion, and we realized we couldn't afford it. So our platform, which is fully costed and will be released soon, looks at providing dental right now for low-income Canadians. Because I don't see how, Jagmeet, I don't see how you found the money, how your budget, as Paul said, it doesn't reflect the kind of costs for universal free dental. Universal health care through pharmacare is essential. It'll help us bring down costs. It'll save us billions of dollars a year. But we can only afford low-income dental.
Let me respond to that then. So, we know that dental care is something essential. Dental care, dental health is not something we can separate from our overall health. And we believe we can't afford not to invest in dental care right now. There's far too many Canadians that can't afford their dental care, and they end up in hospitals, and they don't get their initial problem treated because there is no dental coverage. We believe we can do it. I've met so many families that are struggling with the cost of dental care, and it's a commitment of ours. We'll start with pharmacare for all, and then through revenues including closing offshore tax havens and other loopholes, making sure we ensure that those at the very top
Andrew Scheer, I want to hear you briefly on
all these programs.
You cannot increase healthcare services when you're paying more and more money to pay the service charges on the debt. And that is what all these plans will lead to. Higher and higher taxes, which take money out of the economy, which means that there's less economic growth, which means there's fewer opportunities for people trying to lift themselves out of poverty. Every dollar that goes to a bondholder or a banker for the debt that they hold is another dollar that you can't put into expand those services. That's why it's important to have a responsible plan to get back to balanced budgets. That's how we're going to lower taxes to leave more money in your pocket. And it is true that up to 95% of Canadians
I can't believe you're
are
doubling down on this false
eligible for pharmacare.
I'm going to give give you some advice
are
here. Pro tip:
eligible
don't double down
for-
on that.
are
It didn't look good
eligible
for you
for
last time.
prescription drug coverage, and that is why a government should be focused on those people who fall through the cracks.
Well,
That is
that's
the
why
role of government.
we need to provide
to fill in the gaps
Maybe
that
in
the
your
private
world,
You're
sector
right
most
that we
Canadians
need-
are covered, but in the real
I'm
world
going
out there,
to,
Canadians are not covered.
I'm going to call an audible here, folks. We've certainly seen some stark differences among you on these issues. I've got a question that doesn't fit into our issue areas, but that is one of the questions of the week, which is Bill 21 in Quebec, which will forbid public servants, which today forbids public servants from wearing religious signs, including teachers. And the Premier of Quebec, François Legault, said this. He's calling on all of you to stay out of that debate and not to challenge it in law. He wants you all to make an undertaking, not just for now, but forever, to never challenge that legislation. Quebecers, he says, have decided. He's going to get what he wants, isn't he? Ms. May first.
I find it very distressing. Bill 21 is clearly an infringement on individual human rights. We also have a situation where our federation, as someone who believes I am competent and fully able to be Prime Minister, I take it very seriously. When I look back at our history of divisions within this country, separatism within Quebec, I don't want to fuel. I want to work to find a way that ensures the rights of every Quebecer wearing a hijab or a turban or a yarmulke, that they're actually protected. And it may be that we can find a solution where we leave Quebec alone, but we find jobs for anyone that Quebec has taken off of their payroll for working in a government job. And how you qualify kindergarten teachers as a government job, never mind.
So you give jobs to people who have to leave?
Yes.
Andrew Scheer.
I've made my views on this position very clear. The Conservative Party will always stand up for individual liberties. We are the party of the Bill of Rights. We are the party that supports individual expression. This is not something that we would ever think of imposing at the federal level. And right now, people in Quebec who are opposed to this legislation or affected by this legislation are pursuing it in the courts, as is their right. And ultimately, the courts will make a decision on that.
A Conservative government won't join them in the court.
We're not going to intervene in the case. The people who are against this bill are doing that. They are using the courts, as is their right, and the courts will ultimately decide on that.
Jagmeet Singh.
You know, I think about what this bill says to a lot of kids out there that are made to feel like they don't belong because of the way they look. I remember when I was made to feel like I couldn't do things because of the way I looked. This is a law that effectively says that not just do we discriminate people maybe in society, but now it's legislated. It's legislated discrimination, and it's sad and it's hurtful. And I think about all the people that wanted to pursue becoming an educator or maybe wanted to become a lawyer or a judge, and how it's telling them that they are less worthy and they don't belong. What I do, I recognize that this is within the jurisdiction of Quebec.
We've got to wrap it up.
There's an important challenge going on right now, and that's an important challenge, and I support that right to challenge this law in court. I'm hoping that I can send a message to people in Quebec that you can believe in who you are, you can celebrate your identity, and contribute to society, and I'm hoping that I can send that message.
Okay, so everyone going to court against that law in Quebec, these leaders wish you luck. And that concludes our discussion of economic issues and a couple of others. To get reaction and let you know how you can get involved, we'll be taking a few mid-debate breaks with our City News colleagues. Here's Melanie Ng in Toronto.
Thank you very much for that, Paul. A lot of people are chiming in online. In fact, this hashtag, First Debate, is trending #1 on Twitter in Canada. But we are also taking your questions, getting your reaction. Poll. We released this poll earlier on in the day, and this was the question we were asking you. Are you planning to vote in the federal election? Overwhelmingly, 87% saying yes, 13% saying no. We'll keep this poll open, but we want to bring in a new one, and this one is on Twitter. Here's the question. Of the 4 debate topics, what is the most important issue to you? As you know, we are discussing 4 major ones here: economy, foreign policy, Indigenous issues, energy, and the environment. So that's going up on Twitter right now, and you can have your say. We'll check in about 20 minutes' time. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, we are bringing in the pros. Aaron Brindle from Google Canada is a trends expert. He'll be following the analytics throughout this debate. And Dilshad Berman is part of our digital team here with Citytv, City News Toronto. She has also been shooting some behind-the-scenes footage on Instagram where the leaders were arriving to our building here in Toronto, as well as some of the supporters who are standing by there. So don't forget to vote. We'll check back in with you on these polls. Meantime, we're going to check in with our Janella Massa, who is standing by in the eastern part of Toronto at the Rotary Club. Janella.
That's right, Mel. And we heard from some of the folks here at the Rotary Club just at the very beginning of the debate and heard some of their concerns. I want to bring back Gil, who spoke with us earlier. What did you hear that jumped out at you? We were talking about the deficit and some different approaches to that.
Well, right off the bat, I think Mr. Trudeau is conspicuous by his absence, so I don't think he did himself any favors there. I noticed that Mr. Singh is trying to portray Mr. Scheer as a forward conservative, and I don't know how that will carry. I know Miss May, kudos for her being a Rotarian, but I think her spending projections, I don't see how they could possibly cost that out, because it talks about there will be so much spending done, as my colleague last week was saying. You can't just keep spending without having some way of paying for it. So that would be my big worry between Mr. Singh and Ms. May, and that's my initial reaction.
Thoughts. Thank
Yes.
you so much for sharing that, and we'll send now back to the debate.
Indigenous issues have rarely been at the center of as many national debates as they've been over the past 4 years. From pipelines to clean drinking water to the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls with its 231 recommendations or calls for justice. That's why we've decided our second topic tonight will be Indigenous issues. And I'll warn the leaders right now, I'm going to be a little bit more interventionist in making sure you don't talk all over your one another. It's good to be excited, but we have to be comprehensible too. Andrew Scheer from the Conservative Party, you get the first question. Mr. Scheer, last week the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal handed down a decision that could force the federal government to pay $2 billion in compensation to First Nations children harmed by the on-reserve child welfare system. Would you appeal that decision or accept it?
Well, I would certainly acknowledge that the federal government has a unique responsibility as it relates to First Nations and especially Indigenous children, both on and off reserve. It's very important that that the programs that are offered to young Indigenous people give them the exact same opportunities that every single other Canadian has. It's very important that federal government works in partnership with First Nations communities. I've got a great relationship with Grand Chief Perry Bellegarde. He actually comes from my home riding of Regina Capel. That's why our Conservative government will be focused on practical things that can alleviate the types of challenges that are facing Indigenous Canadians. That includes ensuring that we end long-term boil water advisories, that there are partnerships in place so that people on reserve and off reserve can have access to the same types of jobs that other Canadians do. That means saying yes to important natural resource projects that give people an opportunity. We will, of course, abide by court decisions and see the types of impacts that has on our abilities to provide those programs, but of course we're going to be there as a willing partner.
Ms. May.
Yeah, I'm pleased to hear you say, if I did understand your answer, that you will fully enforce the new ruling from the Human Rights Tribunal, because we have seen millions of dollars in wasted legal efforts to quash the efforts of Cindy Blackstock and the Child and Family Services and Caring Society. This is a huge victory for the work that's been done to protect Indigenous children, with the Canadian government fighting them tooth and nail. And the things you've mentioned, Andrew, are essential but not at all sufficient to meet the challenge of truth, justice, and reconciliation, which means committing to the fully, as we do as Greens, completely fulfilling the requirements and the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the Murdered Missing Indigenous Women's Inquiry. We will do these things, and that's just the beginning of working for real justice, which means allowing First Nations, Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit societies that self-identify. They decide who's a member of their community, and we begin to let and encourage that we have communities and nations opt out of the Indian Act, so we can end this structural violence that is our current system of laws.
I want to make sure I understand. In the case of a Human Rights Tribunal decision like this, the federal government has 30 days to decide whether to refer it to a federal court.
That's right.
Which means that guy, the Prime Minister, must make that decision during this campaign.
Yes.
You would argue that he shouldn't refer it to a federal court?
He must immediately accept that this is long overdue, and Canada will fulfill long in a period of injustice towards Indigenous children. We have more Indigenous children in care now than at the height of the residential schools. This is a crisis.
Mr. Scheer, how would you respond?
It's essential that the outcome of these types of decision actually gets the resources to the people that need it the most, and ensuring that this type of decision focuses the federal government's efforts on creating those same types of opportunities that every other Canadian has is the essential part here.
I didn't hear if you would accept the ruling or not. This is Indigenous kids that are not getting equal funding. The Human Rights Tribunal of Canada has ruled, and Mr. Trudeau certainly hasn't listened to rulings in the past. He's appealed 4 or 5 times previous rulings. Now, Mr. Scheer, it's not surprising, but it is appalling that he hasn't said that he would accept the ruling. Let me be very clear. Yes, a new Democratic government would accept the ruling. At a minimum, we shouldn't be taking Indigenous kids to court. They deserve respect and dignity. That's what reconciliation is all about. At a basic level, we ensure that there's equal funding. We also ensure that there's clean drinking water, there's access to quality homes, that we make sure that Indigenous people are treated as equal partners in decisions. I mean, I'm appalled that Mr. Scheer couldn't just say, yes, we wouldn't appeal the decision.
On the broader question, don't rulings like this demonstrate how much expectations and frustration have increased even in only the last 4 years? And Mr. Scheer, doesn't that make it a much greater governing challenge than it was even the last time a Conservative was in power 4 years ago?
No, you're absolutely right. And if there's one area where Justin Trudeau raised expectations to levels that he has been a complete disappointment on, it is on Indigenous files. We have seen, the disdain that he has shown people that he had promised as it relates to Grassy Narrows, an important improvement in the health care services to those people, and the disdain and dismissive attitude he had to those people who are advocating on their behalf. I think we can all agree on that the fact that there are still so many places in Canada where Indigenous children can't drink the water, where they don't have the access to
with all due respect, Andrew, it was Conservative senators that blocked the passage of the bill that passed in the House of Commons that we should honour the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Those are your people in
for a very important reason. For a very important reason, Ms. May.
Because they wanted to block Indigenous rights.
Because in that bill, there is a provision that would force governments to recognize that in order for big projects to go ahead, the types of job-creating projects that give people opportunity.
You actually would have to give prior and informed consent.
Free, prior, and informed consent. And that means that we would have tremendous uncertainty. It means that if there were some... let me finish. This is very important.
If you can't actually
get communities on side, Indigenous communities who want a project to proceed, they would be vetoed if there were some that were opposed. And part about respecting Indigenous rights means respecting the right to say yes. And we do not live in a country where any one group of people have a veto.
Free, prior, and informed consent is the reason the Conservatives stopped the bill.
Does that mean...
Free, prior, and informed consent.
Does that mean that you need unanimity for big projects to go ahead?
We signed on in the United Nations to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The government under Justin Trudeau said we would live up to it, and we passed it in Parliament.
I'm going to jump ahead of the next question because this thing that moderators dread just happened. You started debating my next question before I got a chance to ask it, but I think it works out well. The next question is to Jagmeet Singh, and it's on Bill C-262. Mr. Singh, your colleague Romeo Saganash spent his last months as an MP promoting his private member's bill, 262, which called for Canadian laws to be brought into conformity with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. That bill died in the Senate because of Conservative opposition. Basically, let's keep going with this debate. Beyond the symbolism of that bill, how would it improve the daily lives of Indigenous people?
Well, it's a pretty transformative piece of legislation. What it essentially says is that we should treat Indigenous peoples with respect as equal partners. And it's something that we haven't seen by Mr. Trudeau. In fact, Mr. Scheer alluded to it, but I want to just spell it out. I went to Grassy Narrows. This is a community surrounded by lakes and rivers, a beautiful community surrounded by water. And the people who live there wake up every day and look at those lakes and rivers knowing that those lakes and rivers are poisoned by mercury. Now, people who are deeply concerned about the poisoning of their water, who suffer the impacts of mercury poisoning, which results in shakes and dizziness, they live in that with that threat. Some of those activists went to a private fundraiser, and behind closed doors, we saw the real Justin Trudeau. And what he did was he mocked activists who were concerned about poisoned water. He mocked them, made fun of them, and then people clapped and applauded. That is what you get with Mr. Trudeau. I mean, these are people that deserve justice and fairness, and that's why I would implement the declaration. But most importantly, I would assure that clean drinking water, clean homes, access to education are a right, and we would establish that.
Mr. Scheer, on the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
Again, this is a very important provision. There are many laudable goals within this piece of legislation, many things that a conservative government will support, that I will support as Prime Minister. But we cannot create a system in this country where one group of individuals, one Indigenous community can hold hostage large projects that employ so many Indigenous Canadians. Mining, for example, is the single largest employer for Indigenous Canadians. If this bill is implemented, we will see the complete blockages of large projects that build the types of prosperity. There were over 37 partnerships agreements signed with the Northern Gateway pipeline project. There are many Indigenous Canadians who will benefit from Trans Mountain. And yes, there are people who are opposed it, but we do not live in a country where any one group of people have a veto over
the language you are using is so inappropriate when talking about Indigenous Canadians. You are missing the fact that Section 35 of the Constitution already, as interpreted by the courts, goes almost all the way to what the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
Is much different.
Consulting is not, I will consult with you till you agree with what we've already decided to do. That's not consultation, and it's not. It's what Trudeau thinks is consultation. It's obviously what you think is consultation, but it has to be free, prior, informed consent.
It is true, Mr. Scheer, though, that the judge in the Trans Mountain decision last year said that a duty to consult doesn't mean waiting until the people you're consulting stop talking and then do what you want.
No, you're absolutely right. The judges and the court decisions on this have been clear. The duty to consult means real consultations. It means dynamic consultations. We saw the Trudeau Liberals fail to do that properly. It means that where appropriate, those concerns need to be addressed. But it does not mean that any one Indigenous community or another can hold up projects if they happen to disagree with it. We have to live in a country where we can have the types of confidence from investors to build things to get people working. That is the only way to build prosperity for Indigenous Canadians.
So that's not at all what's going to happen. First of all, you use language like hold hostage. I mean, that's just incredibly disrespectful off the top.
You tell that to the dozens of communities who have been left out because they don't have the opportunities to work.
Now, what happened is he's talking as if he doesn't understand the reality. You're going to have to work with communities. If you don't have communities buying in, projects won't go ahead. And it's a matter of respect and dignity. And we should move forward with respect and dignity. It's, in fact, better for business. If we ensure that we have a process that we know is going to work, we're going to work with communities and make sure that they feel engaged, involved. And yes, that means they can say no. And yes, that also means they can say yes.
So what happens in the event?
Work together, and partnership is the only way forward. We can't have Mr. Scheer's approach, which is to ram projects through. We need to make sure people agree and that communities are behind it.
What happens if one Indigenous community says no?
We're talking nations, not communities, not groups. The language you are using, Andrew, shows no
Indigenous
respect.
community says no.
It means we have to work towards reconciliation.
Does the Conservative leader not have a point? Is there not division among Native nations over some of these projects?
First, to say that when Andrew tries to deflect the reasons that they stopped the acceptance of the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People and ignoring the Section 35 requirements that are already there, he threw it that, well, Trudeau did it wrong on Trans Mountain. Okay, Harper did it wrong on Enbridge. Same thing. We have governments that think that consultation is to keep talking at Indigenous nations and groups until they agree. Now, in the context of territorial recognition, you can't treat Indigenous Canadians as though they were an interest group or a lobby. The rights that they have in the Constitution, and which we as federal leaders have a fiduciary responsibility to protect, even under Section 35, much less under UNDRIP, require a rootedness in territory. So the territory of the Squamish and the Musqueam and the Tsleil-Waututh will be irrevocably destroyed if Trans Mountain goes ahead and there's a single dilbit leak, a single one.
That's right. Let's move on there because we will be spending a whole block later talking about pipelines. So I want to go to my last question on Indigenous issues specifically, and that question is for Elizabeth May, the Green Party. Ms. May, in interviews you've suggested that if SNC-Lavalin were found guilty on corruption charges, the company should be ordered by a court to perform community service by repairing water infrastructure on reserves. Did you mean that as a serious proposal? And if you didn't, what's your real policy for improving on-reserve infrastructure?
Well, of course, our policy on reserve infrastructure is that every First Nation and every Indigenous community should have drinkable water, and that's a responsibility of the federal government. So the connection to First Nations around my approach for SNC-Lavalin is just one example of what could be done. Let's be clear. SNC-Lavalin needs to go to court. The DPA agreement is still hanging out there. And after the election, whether it's a Conservative or a Liberal sitting in the PMO, they are all riddled with influence from SNC-Lavalin. They have, SNC-Lavalin had its tentacles right in to the civil service at the most senior level at a way that requires an inquiry. But what do you do to protect the workers? Okay, that's Justin Trudeau's excuse. Got to protect the workers. Well, the workers have it. The corporation has billions of dollars of existing contracts. There is no evidence that jobs are at stake. But if you wanted to come up with something creative, which could not be Green Party policy, it would have to be up to a judge to say, I'd like to order this company to do community service, do the work that needs to be done, maybe in transportation infrastructure in a downtown, maybe fixing the water line under the Fraser River from Mission, BC, which if it's 38 years old and it's already showing cracks, someone has to pay to do that work. Why not make SNC-Lavalin do it, but no profit line in the work they do?
Mr. Singh, your MPs were quite critical of this idea.
I mean, it's a bit ludicrous to suggest that we should be building public infrastructure through punishment of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. It is a ludicrous idea. We should be building public infrastructure through public dollars. We should be investing in not P3s where profit is the motive, but where we publicly own it.
I took the profit out of it. That's the whole proposal.
I mean, we shouldn't be proposing that a private company do it that way.
Who do you think builds infrastructure on First Nations?
We should have a public tender, and a public tender should be providing the services. Listen,
but the public
First
tender
Nations,
goes to private corporations.
No one would ever suggest that in a city like Toronto, that if the water was not clean, that we would ask a corporation as punishment to clean it. We would clean the water. I mean, people across this country deserve clean water.
But your MP issued on your letterhead, the NDP issued a press release that was a big fat lie, claimed I wanted to privatize water infrastructure. The Green Party doesn't support P3s. The Green Party is against privatizing infrastructure, fully against it.
You can just accept it was a bad idea.
Well, it certainly was misinterpreted, and it's not policy of the Green Party.
You started off the question on a very topical note, and that is Justin Trudeau's corruption scandal as it relates to SNC-Lavalin, and the fact that he broke the law. He is the only prime minister that has ever been convicted of breaking the law, and he lied about it. And now we find out that the RCMP is looking into this case with the view to possible obstruction of justice charges, and he is obstructing their attempts to get the truth. So I want to use this opportunity to again call on Justin Trudeau to do the right thing and waive full cabinet privilege and cabinet confidence to allow people to testify to the RCMP so we can get to the bottom of this issue.
But don't you agree with me that we need a full inquiry? I don't think we're going to get an RCMP inquiry is internal. I think we need the equivalent of a Gomery inquiry because we have to get corporate influence out of government. SNC-Lavalin is not the only large transnational that can get people in PMO and PCO to jump where they say jump.
I think it absolutely is right. That's what we started with when we were first asked the question. We came out and said there should be a public inquiry. But I want to make something really clear. Whether we have Mr. Trudeau in government and a Liberal government or Mr. Scheer in government, at the end of the day, both these parties, they continue to make it easier for the rich to get ahead. That's their priority. So it wouldn't have been much different. The PMO's office, if it was a Mr. Scheer office, would have got the call directly from SNC. All the wealthiest corporations know to it and either donate to Liberals or donate to, that's not true and you know it.
You met with
they donate to either Conservatives or they donate to Liberals because they know it's either those parties.
I think I'm so uncorruptible, SNC-Lavalin never asked to meet me.
There's a pretty simple test of your attitude towards SNC, Mr. Scheer. If you become Prime Minister, will the public prosecutor be permitted to decide whether SNC continues to trial?
Absolutely. The core of this issue is whether or not we want to live in a country where powerful politicians get to pick up the phone and tell prosecutors how to do their job.
Okay,
the whole root of this is that Justin Trudeau didn't like the answer that his Attorney General gave him, so he fired her. That is a huge attack on the independence of our justice system.
And I can hear so many people saying right now, this was supposed to be about Indigenous issues. So I do want to ask Mr. Singh, Mr. Scheer, Ms. May, if there's time, because you've already been addressing the question, how do you fix dirty water on Indigenous communities? It's an intractable problem, it seems.
It's a huge problem. Paul, I don't see how in a country as wealthy as ours, in the year 2019, with the technology that we have, that there is any excuse for clean drinking water not being available to everybody. I reject any excuse. I reject any sort of plausible denial that this is not possible. It is possible. We have the resources. What we've lacked is the courage to do so. Mr. Trudeau jumped quickly to give $14 billion to the wealthiest corporations to buy corporate jets and limousines. He jumped quickly to buy a pipeline. If this was a priority, it would have got done. With New Democrats, we would make this a priority.
And we're nearly out of time.
All the resources and get it done.
Mr. Scheer, same question.
Yeah, this is a huge issue and one that a Conservative government will take seriously. I will absolutely ensure that I sit down with Indigenous leaders to find ways to address this. It means investments in infrastructure on reserve. It also means training people on reserve to be able to maintain and upgrade and manage these types of facilities. That's a partnership that I'm willing to engage in.
It's straightforward. Water infrastructure in Indigenous communities needs to be owned by Indigenous communities, and the workforce that keeps that system working needs to be from people in the community. The ownership with top-notch equipment will ensure that every community has safe drinking water.
Okay. That concludes our discussion of Indigenous issues. I'll be back in a minute with the leaders. But for live reaction and a chance to join the conversation, here again is City News host Melanie Ng.
Thank you so much, Paul. Yes, a lot of people chiming in right now, especially on Twitter. I want to bring out the results for a Twitter poll we put out about 20 minutes ago. Of the 4 debate topics that we will be discussing tonight, what is the most important issue to you? Overwhelmingly, there are 2. The economy at 52% and energy, the environment at 38%, and then foreign policy and Indigenous issues at 6 and 5 respectively. But you can continue to chime in on this poll. Meanwhile, elephant in the room. A lot of people are asking, where is Justin Trudeau? He is, in fact, in Edmonton in a riding that he is hoping to take from the NDP. So this is just some video from him previously on in the evening. We'll talk more about this and show you some more highlights coming up. Meanwhile, I want to bring in another poll for you, and this one is going to be via Facebook. This is how you can chime in. Does a leader's debate performance affect how you vote, or lack thereof, because we're not seeing Justin Trudeau here? So have your say. We're going to put this on our Facebook page right now. Meanwhile, we're going live to Courtney Theriault, who is in Enoch Cree Nation, just outside of Edmonton, speaking with First Nations chiefs.
Thank you very much, Melanie. We are here on Treaty 6 land with the chiefs from the Alexis, Nakota Sioux, Saddle Lake, Enoch, Ermiskin, and Frog Lake, as well as the Grand Chief. And we're going to do the lightning round because there's a lot to chew on here, and we'll get to that a little bit later on in the post-debate show. But right now, 2 questions, lightning round. Who impressed you the most throughout the Indigenous portion of this debate, and how would you describe it in a word or 2?
Courtney, this is an important election, and the First Nation people need to, and Indigenous people need to participate and make sure that we're catching up on the information, participating in the talks, and we have to be prepared to get out and vote.
Okay. Who do you think? Who impressed you?
None really. My first thought was you can't make chicken salad out of chicken droppings, no matter how you stir it. I hear a lot of fluff, and it's the same fluff that's been going on for years and years, and there's nothing about equal resources of Native communities.
All right, we do have to hurry up here. Billy, get you going. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think as opposed to a winner, I think there's a loser, and that's Mr. Scheer, who can't give a straight-up answer to a straight-up question. And I think the actual winner is Justin Trudeau, because nobody else is standing out when it comes to Indigenous issues. It sounds like a lot of rhetoric again. Okay, Grand Chief Littlechild?
Yes, likely in a similar vein. I'm not impressed by any of them. In fact, I'm very unimpressed by Mr. Scheer continuing to misrepresent what the UN Declaration means.
All right, and just get a winner because we are cutting time. Who do you think most impressed you, real quickly, gentlemen?
I guess for myself, it would be Elizabeth May, but then I'm more interested in Justin Trudeau's speech, see what he has to say.
Okay, Chief Desjardins, who impressed you, real quick?
I would like to say NDP Singh, just because he touched on some very important issues that are important to us Indigenous people.
All right, there you go. Just a taste of the discussion that we will continue a little bit later on, post-debate here on the City News Maclean's debate. Right now, though, we're going to turn things over to Cynthia, who's back with our political analyst panel.
That's right, Courtney. I have some great political minds at this table with me. Amanda Galbraith, who's a principal at Navigator. You've also worked with conservative governments. Andre Domis, contributing editor to Maclean's. Lisa Kinsella, you are a Liberal commentator. And John Geddes, who is the bureau chief in Ottawa. John, what are your thoughts so far? 2 out of the 3 leaders here, it's their first debate on the federal stage.
Yeah, and I think the most important dynamic we're seeing so far is Andrew Scheer starting out hoping to push the focus off this studio and out to Justin Trudeau. He'd like to be attacking Trudeau, but then Jagmeet Singh bringing it at Scheer, making it very difficult for him to do that. So I think so far Jagmeet Singh is directing a lot of the fire and doing it quite effectively. And I think it will be interesting to see if Andrew Scheer can somehow bring it back to a different dynamic later.
Lisa.
I think that's true. I think Jagmeet Singh is doing exceptionally well. He had a job to do tonight and he is doing it.
Okay, Andre, I'm sorry, I've got to cut you off here.
I heard a couple of really concerning things. One is that Andrew Scheer seems to believe that Canada can just unilaterally violate treaties with unceded First Nations territories. And Elizabeth May just keeps floating this idea that she's going to punish SNC Lavalin should they be convicted of a felony or a crime by making them do community work in First Nations. Please stop. Just stop.
Amanda, I'm going to give you the final say.
I think Andrew Scheer's holding his own and sort of speaking directly to voters. He's very calm. I think Singh's a surprise for all of us. He's a lot stronger than I thought he was going to be. Very scrappy. I think Elizabeth May is proving why her party should probably have her campaigning a little less publicly sometimes.
All right, and on that note, I'm going to send it back to the debate and Paul Wells.
4 years ago, despite its extraordinary resource wealth, Canada was struggling to get pipelines built. And despite all the headlines about climate change, the country seemed unlikely to hit its targets for emission cuts. Today, all of that is still true. Our next topic of conversation is energy and the environment. Setting the stage for us, City News reporter Tara Overholt.
The federal carbon tax.
We put a price on pollution because it shouldn't be free to pollute anywhere in this country.
It sparked hope in some.
I think it's a great idea.
Anger in others.
It's an exceptionally and profoundly stupid idea.
And created deep political divisions.
We cannot afford the risk of a carbon tax recession.
To scrap the carbon tax cash grab.
It's the cornerstone of Ottawa's strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But complicating the government's goal of fostering a green-friendly image, the stark reality of Canada's economy. 4th largest exporter of crude oil in the world. Billions of tax dollars now invested in pipelines, and more than 800,000 Canadian jobs linked to energy. In Calgary, I met with just a few of those workers who have seen the good times dry up.
For all of us here who have watched our friends struggle, maybe be out of work for numerous years or struggle to find meaningful work, they're underemployed if they are employed, it's something that's very, very personal and very important to me.
All 3 feel that the industry is misunderstood by many Canadians and under-supported by the Liberal government.
The lack of energy knowledge is really hurting the country, the importance of it and the difficulty of which it's going to be to convert to a different energy system. People just don't seem to grasp the magnitude of that. You need a plan. You need to think this out.
A recent Angus Reid poll highlights the challenge for political leaders. Canadians want the government to make climate change and oil and gas development top priorities.
I think we need to talk about economy. We need to talk about energy. We need to talk about the environment. Even within the energy industry, we don't talk enough about how most of us are so informed and we care so much about the environment.
So I do think we need to find a way to find a balanced conversation and reunify the country.
The first question on energy and the environment goes to Jagmeet Singh of the NDP. Mr. Singh, after your party lost a by-election to the Greens in Nanaimo this spring, your candidate Sven Robinson called on you to abandon your support for the LNG Canada mega project. That's a $40 billion project with hundreds of jobs attached to it. It's also heavily subsidized by Justin Trudeau's government and by British Columbia's NDP government. Do you still support it?
What I support is the fact that British Columbia is a province with one of the best climate action plans in the country, one of the best climate action plans in Canada. And they've made sure that everything they do is going to fit within their bold climate action plan. And I support that. What I don't support is Mr. Trudeau and his government, who has absolutely no plan to include something like the Trans Mountain into their projects. It is disrespectful to Indigenous nations. They haven't considered the potential risk to the beautiful coastline in BC. One spill of a diluted oil bitumen could result in massive devastation. And I think about what's at stake. We know that we've got to move to an economy that is zero emission. That is the future. We know we've got to go there. I remember a mom that I met who told me she was worried about the future, and I asked her why. She said, I'm worried about climate crisis. And she had a baby in her arms. She said, I'm worried about the future because I'm worried if my daughter will be able to breathe the air on some days in British Columbia because of the massive forest fires. We have a real crisis, and we have to have the courage to act.
I want to make sure I understand. If you form government, if you have the deciding vote in a minority government, that LNG Canada project goes ahead because the NDP government of BC wants it.
What I can tell you is that we would immediately end all fossil fuel subsidies. We believe that those fossil fuel subsidies need to be ended, and we need to be investing into clean energy. That would be our commitment.
Andrew Scheer, you get the first response.
Well, it's always been the case that the NDP don't support developing our natural resources. What we now know is that neither do the Trudeau Liberals. His carbon tax has not put a price on pollution. It has given a massive exemption to the country's largest emitters. Large emitters can receive an exemption of up to 90% of the carbon tax, but hardworking individuals pay the full cost, as do small and medium-sized businesses. And as it relates to the LNG plant, the only reason why it was allowed to proceed was because it was given an exemption from the carbon tax. So the only way you can get big projects built in this country under the Liberals is when the Liberals don't apply their own policies. Of course, Conservatives, I support LNG projects that get our natural resources to foreign markets that also displace dirtier foreign sources of energy. We can do more to lower global emissions by exporting more of what Canada does so well.
Ms. May.
We have to move away from fossil fuels as rapidly as possible. Our policies are science-driven, and I'm afraid neither Mr. Singh nor Mr. Scheer understands, and neither Mr. Trudeau understands climate science, because if they understood the peril we are in right now as a human family on this planet, the need to hold to 1.5 degrees Celsius means that you can't proceed with the Trans Mountain Pipeline. You can't proceed with LNG Canada, which, by the way, isn't Canadian. It's owned by mostly multinationals from Asia, including PetroChina. So when Bill Morneau gives them $1 billion in tariff waivers, and then they pump $220 million into the project, and they claim there's 10,000 jobs, guess where 5,500 of those jobs are? In the fabrication plant in China. So we are subsidizing a project that'll blow through our carbon budget with 125 megatons of additional carbon. That's 125 million tons of additional carbon. It doesn't matter how good Mr. Horgan's rhetoric is on climate. This project is a climate killer. The jobs that we are subsidizing are being created in the People's Republic of China. It should be stopped.
We have a fair bit of time to discuss all of this, but I do want to open up a little parenthesis and ask about the issue that Ms. May raised. The tariff waiver for Chinese steel to build this project. Mr. Singh, Mr. Scheer.
A horrible decision. I mean, we're seeing that our own Canadian manufacturing sectors are being horribly impacted by steel dumping. Steel dumping is essentially flooding the market with steel that is of a lesser quality. The environmental restrictions aren't there. It displaces good paying quality jobs here in Canada. It's something we've got to do much more to attack. Without any measures to challenge the steel dumping, it could seriously continue to threaten jobs in the manufacturing sector for steel and aluminum here in Canada. One of the things that I was deeply concerned with was that Mr. Trudeau completely disregarded the steel tariffs that threatened a lot of jobs, steel and aluminum tariffs, and instead signed an agreement with a country while they still had illegal tariffs imposed on us. We've got to change our approach to make sure we've got manufacturing in Canada that's strong, that's supported. That's our commitment.
So will you come out against LNG Canada?
On the steel waiver, on the tariff waiver.
I can agree with Mr. Singh that it was very disappointing to see Justin Trudeau sign a deal with Donald Trump after conceding so much without getting a solution on steel tariffs. And then when it finally did come, it still gave a lot of flexibility to the U.S. government to put those tariffs back in. As it relates to LNG, the reason why the federal government, the explanation that we were given by these Liberals on the subsidies that they gave the project was to compensate for the differential on steel. And then they turn around and lift the waiver, the tariffs anyway. So we got the worst of both worlds. We had to put in the taxpayer money to compensate for it. Then the tariffs were lifted and the Chinese steel is able to come in. this is just another point of weakness on Justin Trudeau's dealing with our difficult situation with the government of China. He's put money into the Asian Infrastructure Bank, building roads and bridges to help the government of China expand its influence in the region, and he's taken this move on the steel tariffs as it relates to LNG. So another example where Justin Trudeau can't stand up for Canadian workers.
Yeah, I think what we need to do when it comes to manufacturing, one of the things we proposed, I went to Thunder Bay and I met with the workers who no longer have a job. Many of them received layoff notices because they couldn't continue to produce their amazing products in Bombardier and Thunder Bay. Now, at the same time, Canada spent $1 billion on a contract to buy, in our publicly owned train sector, to buy trains from a German company. And I've said that that's completely irresponsible. To use public dollars to fund other countries and their manufacturing sectors is irresponsible. What I would do to those men and women that are working in Thunder Bay, to the people that work here in Canada, is say this: if we're ever spending any public dollars, we should spend that money on procurement process that requires made in Canada content. That means ensuring that we support manufacturing in our country. The workers who work so hard have a future where they know they can rely on investments by Canada to support manufacturing in Canada.
I just wish you supported the steelworkers at Evraz Steel in Regina that make the steel for pipelines. I just wish you supported the steelworkers in Hamilton who also sell products into the energy sector. No, you don't. Those jobs won't exist if we don't have development projects in this country. That's just a simple fact.
We just have to respect the reality that we're facing climate crisis, and we've got to make better decisions.
When you
we can put those great workers,
when you leave our
those
natural
incredible
resources,
workers, we can give them opportunities.
The moderator will move along. Thank you. To the second question, which goes to Elizabeth May. Ms. May, a pillar of your plan to fight climate change is to retrofit every single building in Canada to make them all carbon neutral in just 10 years. The economist Andrew Leach says that means getting 7 million homes off natural gas or heating oil, and that both electricity and housing stock are matters of provincial jurisdiction. How far do you plan to get with this, working with Jason Kenney and Doug Ford in implementing your audacious plan?
Well, let's just make it clear that the adjective could be audacious. It could also be essential. If we are driven by the science, and we really don't have a lot of choice here, you can't negotiate with physics. There's a carbon budget, and our atmosphere is at a point where no other party seems to understand this. With all due respect to the gentleman on stage with me, no other party has put forward a plan that comes remotely near what we're required to do. And the downsides aren't environmental problems. This issue still is misrepresented as though we're worried about the environment. We're worried about the survival of human civilization through the lifetime of our children, because if we go above 1.5 degrees Celsius global average temperature increase, we're looking at the risk of runaway global warming, of self-accelerating, unstoppable, catastrophic changes, which no civilization can survive. So yes, we can do this. It's all hands on deck. And I believe that even those who are recalcitrant at this point can be persuaded by the science. And if they're not persuaded by the science, we work with the municipal order of government, where they totally understand this issue, and the provinces that want to. And by the way, to our friends back at Rotary, we need to call out to Canadian civil society. Who wants to put a solar panel on your own roof? Who wants to plant a garden? Who wants to help us plant trees?
Your argument is that no other party and no Canadian government recently has operated with the kind of ambition that the scale of the challenge requires.
Correct.
Is there a government in the world that is stepping up?
Sweden, Costa Rica, Denmark. The UK's done way more than us. Most of the industrialized countries that were within the Kyoto Protocol are already far below 1990 levels. We're still far above them. We're required globally to go 45% below 2010 levels by 2030. That's a tough challenge. It's not business as usual. It's not politics as usual. That's why I've written to both Jagmeet, Andrew, and Justin to say we need an interior cabinet that focuses only on this, because we can't stick to status quo decision-making and save ourselves at the same time.
I have so many questions, but my piece of paper says that it's Jagmeet Singh's chance.
Thank you very much. You know, Madam May and I agree a lot. It's absolutely important to be driven by the science. We absolutely believe that we can change the direction of our country if we make the right investments and fossil fuel subsidies. We can invest in clean energy, renewable energy. We also really strongly believe in retrofitting homes and buildings across this country, creating hundreds and thousands of jobs. We envision at the minimum 300,000 new jobs being created. We agree on a lot, and we know that we need to do this. And Ms. May knows that our plan is one of the boldest plans to tackle climate crisis. But there's a couple of points. There's a couple of points that we disagree on. You know, when it comes down to it, the Green Party and New Democrats share a lot in common, except for the following 4 points. When it comes down to it, we have a solid position, unlike the Greens, on a woman's right to choose. We have a solid position when it comes
That's
down
not
to
true.
national unity. We have a belief that we can't leave workers behind, and we strongly believe that we should not be putting Mr. Scheer in the Prime Minister's seat, unlike Ms. May in the Green Party, who believe that's the right choice.
Mr. Scheer, on the question,
those,
and then
those were absurd statements. I'm awfully sorry.
well, I think we're going to parse that a little more closely in a minute. But
can't
Mr.
deny
Scheer,
what you said.
Mr. Scheer, you go first.
First and foremost, I think it's important to understand where we are right now. We have, with Justin Trudeau, a failed approach that has proven not to work. CO2 emissions are going up, and his carbon tax is making everything more expensive. It's making it harder for Canadians to get ahead with this carbon tax. We've seen in British Columbia emissions going up, and nationally we're falling further and further behind. Our environmental plan, the Conservative Party's plan, my plan, helps make life more affordable while we lower greenhouse gas emissions. I do agree with Ms. May that buildings are an essential part of fighting climate change. That's why we are introducing a green home renovation tax credit that will allow Canadians to invest in their homes, to upgrade their furnace, to replace their windows, while getting a generous tax receipt, lowering their energy costs, helping them get ahead, and lowering CO2 emissions at the same time.
Excuse me,
That's exactly our plan.
I'm not going to. I'm sorry, Jagmeet. I had to listen to your absurdities. You're going to have to stop now.
The only difference is that Mr. Scheer doesn't really believe that climate change actually exists.
Ms. May does get a chance to respond.
I'm afraid I am not going to go down the little rabbit hole that Mr. Singh just created. People can check. None of what he just said was true. But we are talking about a carbon budget. We need to work together in this country to ensure that global average temperature increase does not go above 1.5 degrees Celsius. We signed that commitment. That's the Paris Treaty commitment. So far, for targets, Mr. Trudeau has kept Mr. Harper's target. Mr. Scheer would keep Mr. Harper's target, which is approximately half of what needs to be done. 30% below 2005 by 2030 is half of what needs to be done. And your target, Jagmeet, is 38%. We need to reduce by 60% if we're serious. Now, it's not easy, but it is possible. We have to marshal all our resources. We will be putting millions of people to work in this country, transforming our economy and giving our economy a boost that it really needs in new investment.
And Ms. May said something that I agree with. You can't argue the physics.
Right.
And part of the physics is that a molecule of CO2 does not need a passport to travel around the world. And that's why my plan is the only plan that talks about taking the climate change fight global, recognizing that Canada can do more to lower global emissions by doing more of what we do at lower emissions rates, like making aluminum, and exporting clean Canadian technology. There are 3,000 electrical plants in China. If just 100 of them used Canadian carbon capture technology, we could lower emissions by 300 megatons.
The problem is
that
you
is
don't
the
have
type
a
of
target.
approach.
If you don't have a plan.
I'm the only leader talking about taking the climate change
to
fight
tackle
global.
climate crisis as well as creating opportunities for work. There's a way to do both, and we're committed to doing that.
But we have to take it
young
global.
people are worried about climate anxiety.
I've got one
and they
final
can
round
have
of
a brighter
prepared
future if we work
questions.
together.
If I could
I
just
do have
say,
a question for Mr. Scheer, but I want to ask, we're essentially getting into the territory of who could form an acceptable government in the eyes of those parties that might get to choose that. Ms. May, you've said that you would not support a minority government led by any of the other parties. And Mr. Singh, you've said that you would not support a conservative minority?
What I said was, and I know how these parliamentary negotiations go. I have colleagues in Green parties around the world who've negotiated various governments, served in cabinets around the world. And in fact, of course, my colleague Andrew Weaver negotiated a government for British Columbia. But the bottom line for Greens isn't about power for us. The bottom line is, whatever parliament is formed at the end of the next election must be committed to holding to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which means massive transformational changes that start now. And no one else so far, I think they might change their minds in negotiation. Their current policies don't cut it.
And so if the Conservative Party has the most seats but doesn't commit to 1.5 degrees, what's your response as soon as Parliament convenes?
We wouldn't vote for them in a confidence motion, even on the speech from the throne.
Okay, and if that means that Justin Trudeau gets a chance to form a minority government with fewer seats than the Conservatives, you're okay with that?
Well, the majority of Canadians by far have for decades been asking for climate action, and what has stalled it has been the short-term partisan interest of political leader after political leader. It's time for some courage, it's time for some bravery, it's time for saying this is what we must do for our kids, so we will do it.
Mr. Singh, which parties would you and would you not support in a minority situation?
Well, I want to make it clear. I believe that climate crisis is something we've got to take seriously. I'm committed to real action. Mr. Trudeau has said a lot of pretty words, but hasn't really delivered any real action, and he's failed on that front. So our position is clear. We would not support Mr. Scheer. It's his position on his lack of clear position on women's right to choose, on LGBTQ communities. For me, that's not debatable. For us, we want to make it really clear. We have a solid position on those fronts. It doesn't seem that the Green Party is very clear on their position. Our position is very clear. We support national unity. We support a women's right to choose, and we're going to fight to make sure that we build a brighter future for you.
I believe we've just kicked off a debate that's going to go for the rest of this campaign, so I'm not going to indulge it any further tonight. Mr. Scheer, you get the next question on energy and the environment. Mr. Scheer, you have opposed carbon taxes because you prefer regulation of heavy industry. You would force businesses that exceed their emissions targets to invest in clean tech. But in 2014, Stephen Harper said that with energy prices low and the United States letting their companies off easy, quote, it would be crazy economic policy to do unilateral penalties on that sector. We're clearly not going to do it. If he wouldn't do it then, why would you do it now?
I have my own plan. I've unveiled a real plan for the environment. It is the most comprehensive policy ever put forward by an opposition party. It contains over 50 specific measures that will explain how Canada can reach its international obligations. It's built on a number of pillars. Technology over taxes. You are correct to say that we are going to require large emitters to pay into tech development funds. This has been a proven method of actually lowering emissions. There's an example of Gibson Industries in Saskatchewan, which used a similar type of green patent tax credit that I am proposing to lower their emissions. They invested in a new type of technology that allowed them to increase their output while keeping their emissions low. This is what we have seen all across the economy in Canada. When you focus on technology over taxes, you actually get results. The carbon tax is proven to fail. I don't know why anybody would support a policy. It's not a Conservative Party position. It's not my opinion. We are falling as a country further behind our targets under Justin Trudeau's carbon tax. It will only work if he increases it, as he is threatening to do. After this election, if Justin Trudeau is elected, he will make your life less affordable by ramping up that carbon tax.
Elizabeth May.
We need massive investments in energy infrastructure in this country, and they need to be investments in an east-west and reaching north electricity grid so that Canadians are no longer driving internal combustion vehicles. I looked at your plan, Andrew, and it is long, and it does include some good things. I won't say it doesn't. It's got money for Great Lakes, looking at Lake Simcoe. Lake Winnipeg is right now an ecological crisis.
Greening the grid.
So we have some things there.
Tax
But
credit.
listen, there's one thing that is absolutely essential in any credible climate plan, and that is hanging on to human civilization by making sure we hold to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. And we need to understand the window on that opportunity closes soon. And if it closes and we haven't gotten to the other side of that through global leadership, that's where the global part of what Canada should do is that we are still respected in the world. We punch above our weight. If we get our own house in order and say, look, we were dependent on fossil fuels, but look at us now. We're going off fossil fuels by 2050. We're cutting our emissions by 60% by 2030. Our economy is booming as we move into this enormous range of economic opportunities. But if you don't have the right target, you can't make a plan that makes any sense. No one in this election has accepted the target that science requires.
One brief question before we go to Mr. Singh.
No, you haven't.
Elizabeth May, you said that window closes soon. When is soon?
According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, whose reputation, by the way, is that when they're wrong, it's because they underestimate the impact and overestimate how much time we have. So I find it very alarming. As the international community heard their report on October 8th, 2018, people said this is the alarm bell that we can't ignore. Everybody else has hit the snooze button. If we don't ensure that global emissions are 45% below their 2010 levels by 2030, the opportunity to hold to 1.5 degrees Celsius global average temperature increase will close, and it doesn't reopen
plan is the
ever.
only plan that takes the climate change fight global.
We all know that it's very serious. We've seen the impacts of climate crisis in the lives of Canadians. We've seen massive forest fires, the worst that we've ever seen. We know that it's impacting people in Eastern Canada with floods on the record that we've never seen, homes being washed away. And when you see and meet with people who've had their homes washed away, it's heartbreaking. So we know we have to act, but we have a lot of opportunity here. Anytime we're faced with challenges, there's a great opportunity. We believe we can put 300,000 people into great, solid, sustainable jobs if we tackle this crisis. We can retrofit homes. We can end fossil fuel subsidies. There's so much that we can do. We can electrify our transportation, invest in public transportation. I know here in the city of Toronto, people need that desperately. We can get people a better way to move around, which emits less emissions. There's so much hope and so much opportunity.
Well,
we just have to seize the opportunity right now. We know it's going to take a lot of courage. It's going to take bold conviction, but we can do it. There's so much opportunity here. We've got to be committed to it.
You sound almost like a Green, but you won't take a target. You've got 38% reduction.
Keeping it to 1.5 degrees, we know.
But then you have to adopt the 60% below.
We know it's going to take a significant cut. You're absolutely right. It's going to take a big cut.
As with so many other topics tonight, the advantage of having a debate nice and early in the campaign is that I think we've actually set the table for discussions that are going to take place for the entire rest of the campaign. That concludes, you may be relieved to hear, our discussion of environmental issues. I'll be back in a moment, but let's take our final break and check in on reaction to our debate so far.
Thank you, Paul. 3 topics in, and you are definitely chiming in. I want to bring in the poll results for the last one here, and that was, does a leader's debate performance affect how you vote? Overwhelmingly, 64% saying yes, 36% saying no. Does this debate perhaps change your mind? I want to bring this in here for you. What question would you have asked the leaders? Because we are running out of time here. If it doesn't make it to broadcast, we, of course, will be doing some one-on-ones and some scrums with the leaders. So maybe we can get your question in there. You can chime in on Facebook as well as on Twitter. Want to see what else you're talking about. I'm going to bring in Dilshad Berman, who's part of our digital team here at City, and Aaron Brindle, who is a trends expert with Google Canada. Start with you, Aaron. Sure. What are most people Googling right now?
Sure. So people are Googling the leaders, obviously, and we're seeing a tremendous amount of interest in the Prime Minister, the person who's not in the debate tonight. We saw that peak actually in the first few minutes of the debate, I think, with the empty podium probably generated a lot of interest. The top question people are asking about Trudeau over the course of the past hour, where is Justin Trudeau? Where is? And we know he's in Edmonton. We'll bring you more on that in just a bit. Dilshad, overwhelmingly, a lot of people are saying something that we thought, we have 3 leaders here. They'd have more time to talk. What are they saying about that?
Well, most people are wondering why everybody is talking over each other. It seems like they keep interrupting each other. We've got a lot of comments saying, oh, it doesn't look like they respect each other very much. And people are sort of calling into question the leaders' leadership style based on their behavior that they're seeing on air right now. So that's become very interesting. They're kind of judging them as potential leaders of the country.
But so is a debate, right?
Absolutely.
That's how it goes. Okay, so we'll check in again with Dilshad and Aaron in just a little bit. Meantime, we're heading over to Montreal. City News reporter Tina Teneriello, group of students right now talking about the environment, what they think about what the leaders have been saying. Tina.
Yes, thank you so much, Melanie. We're at Dawson College, and we are with students who have been taking to the streets to demand that government take action to fight climate change. We're talking tens of thousands of students that have been protesting this. It's been one of the biggest turnouts around the world. In fact, the Swedish teen climate activist Greta Thunberg even got their attention, and she's going to be coming to Montreal for a protest at the end of the month. And we're joined by some of the students who made this happen, who reached out to Greta and asked. So I want to ask you, Maclean, I saw that you were actually laughing sometimes during this debate. So what do you think? Which leaders, are there any leaders who impressed you?
Well, honestly, I have seen a lot of chatting, some fighting too. Have I seen the needed courage and leadership to tackle this really important crisis? I'm not sure of it. However, I have seen one candidate who was a bit living in his own reality where there is no hurry, no crisis, and it's the Conservative leader.
Is there one issue here that you wish they would have addressed that they did not address?
Yeah, party leaders, they don't seem to realize that economic growth is not sustainable in the long term, that we live in a world with finite resources, limited resources, and we cannot grow indefinitely.
And what about you? What is the most important issue when it comes to the environment during this election campaign?
So it's not about one or many issues, because it's not about getting close to meet the IPCC targets. It's about meeting them or facing what science unanimously describes like an unprecedented global catastrophe.
And why do you think that Quebec youth are so mobilized to fight climate change? Because if we look across the country, Quebec is really standing out, Montreal particularly.
I think we have developed a culture in which we are conscious about the global impacts of climate change. We are fully aware of it, and we're ready to fight it. And that's why on the 27th, we're going to take on the streets and send the message. The environment is our #1 issue.
And on the 27th, they're expecting a historic turnout. The mayor is going to be participating. Some schools actually canceling classes. I want to do a survey now with the students in the room. Raise of hands if you feel that the leaders in this portion of the debate addressed your environmental concerns. Put your hand up if you feel they did. Ooh, two hands up there. All right. Thank you so much, guys, for participating. And we have people watching this debate right now participating that are even too young to vote. So it just shows the engagement of youth across Canada. Over to Cynthia Mulligan now in Toronto with our political panel.
All right, thank you. Amanda Galbraith, is Andrew Scheer doing what he needs to do to take on Justin Trudeau?
I think he's started. He's one of the few leaders we've seen kind of go back to attacking Prime Minister Trudeau over and over
Consistently.
again. Yeah, which I thought we'd see a lot more of. So I think he's doing what he needs to do. It's surprising to me the leaders, the other ones, have not kind of gone at him as much.
Andre?
I would say that it's a little bit surprising to me that Scheer is going after Trudeau when I think his largest threat is actually the NDP. Like, for a lot of Canadians, you know, their biggest issue is the looming climate disaster. And on that front, Scheer and Trudeau are not really that far apart. I would say like his largest threats are from the Greens and the NDP, so I don't know that that is necessarily his biggest target.
All right, Lisa Kinsella, weigh in here.
Well, I think there's been a lost opportunity here. You have Justin Trudeau, who's not at this debate tonight, and I think it took, about 40 minutes before anyone really started going after him. So when you have this, effectively, because both Singh and May have essentially said that they're not going to win this election, what Scheer should have been doing is focusing his attacks on Trudeau as opposed to arguing with the other leaders.
And John?
Quick moment there, though, when Singh, after going very effectively after Andrew Scheer for much of the night, trained his sights on Elizabeth May, which is a reminder that the NDP has to pull back some center-left votes that have drifted to the Greens recently, and that's another important mini-fight within this bigger battle.
All right, thank you. We'll continue watching right now. Back to debate, and Paul Wells.
Stephen Harper used to describe the world as a sea of troubles that Canada needed to avoid. But nowadays, the trouble doesn't bother to stop at our shores. With Canadians detained in China, conflict over tariffs and values with President Donald Trump, and trouble in Kashmir, Venezuela, and the European Union. In a moment, we'll debate Canada's place in the world, but first, City News reporter Travis Prasad with the events that have rocked our reputation on the world stage and how they've impacted sentiment on Main Street.
In Saudi Arabia, an already strained relationship collapses.
This is Rahab Altman, a very brave new Canadian.
As Canada calls out the regime's human rights record and the Saudis respond by severing ties. In China, relations sour after the arrest of a Huawei executive in British Columbia at the behest of the U.S. The swift Chinese response includes the detention of 2 Canadians and economic attacks.
He learned that's going to cost a lot of money for the people of Canada.
And with our largest trading partner, name-calling and a roller coaster relationship with the U.S. president. But after tense negotiations, a new NAFTA, signed though still not ratified. Was it a success? Depends on who you ask. These are the Chaberton Estate Vineyards in Langley, British Columbia. Brian Enser's winery makes 54,000 cases each year. 1/3 are sold in BC grocery stores, where BC wineries have exclusive access.
I think it has been a bit of a boon because access to grocery store shelves and any shelf space is great.
But that will soon change when U.S. wines start pouring in under a new deal that Enser feels the Trudeau Liberals made under pressure from the Trump administration.
Losing shelf space to some small and boutique wineries could be crushing or fatal to the business, depending on how they've situated their sales.
Enser says that while his business can withstand the change, he still can't see the impact of Canada's foreign deal-making as a glass half full.
First question on foreign affairs goes to Jagmeet Singh of the NDP. Mr. Singh, while a lot of my questions have been on very specific files, this one's a bit more general. The fastest growing foreign policy challenge facing Canada today has to be China. We want trade and investment ties that are good for the Canadian economy, but we worry about human rights and the rule of law. How would you reconcile, or at least balance, these conflicting values?
Well, thanks for the question, Paul. We have to do exactly that. We've got to balance the interests. And if you look at the track record so far, we all hope that with Mr. Trudeau, and I can admit that I hoped as well, that it would actually truly bring Canada back on the international platform. There was a lot of difficult years with Harper, who had really embarrassed Canada in a lot of ways. Now with Mr. Trudeau, it's the same thing. There's been a mess of the China situation. It's been a complete debacle. India, the trip was also a complete mess. And now we've negotiated a trade deal that makes it worse for workers. It makes it worse for farmers. It makes medication prices go up. And in general, what we're seeing is, again and again, this emphasis on making life easier for the people at the very top and harder for everyone else. I would approach trade as a free trade is not the way forward. It makes corporations benefit. I'd approach it through fair trade. And with China, it's the same idea. We have to make sure that we have a consistent approach that balances our need for economic development, but that does not create an unlevel playing field for our workers who cannot compete unless there's equal environmental rules and workers' rights.
Elizabeth May?
I have to say that anyone who gives an answer confidently saying they know what to do with China isn't telling the truth. China right now and Canada's relationship with China are imperiled by some rather large forces that are outside of our control. Donald Trump is poking China with a stick and creating a trade war. We're caught in the middle. The arrest of the extradition request for Huawei executive Meng Zhu has created a situation where our number one concern should be, as much as I'm concerned about China stopping canola imports and turning down our hog products, the number one concern must be the safety of Canadians. Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor should be our concern right now, not trade, not anything else. And that means that Canada's diplomatic relations with China have to deepen, have to show that we are serious about working with them. We are in a situation where anyone, as I said, anyone who says there are easy answers here is talking out of their hat. It is a very difficult situation. Donald Trump is difficult and unpredictable, to put it mildly. Meanwhile, People's Republic of China is a country which shows no respect for human rights. It is not a, obviously, it is a totalitarian dictatorship. And thanks to Stephen Harper, we're bound by the Canada-China Investment Treaty so that every state-owned enterprise from the People's Republic of China that operates in Canada is under the threat of Chinese retaliation.
There are some very specific things that a government can do to stand up for our interests, something that Justin Trudeau has failed to do. This conflict with the government of China has been going on for months now, and it was only in the last few days that Trudeau took the step of even naming an ambassador. There is no reason why it took him that long. Also, we can show resolve. We can stand up for ourselves. And as Prime Minister, I will pull the funding from the China-run Asian Infrastructure Bank. I do not understand, Canadians don't understand why their tax dollars are being sent to build roads and bridges in other countries that China has the ability to influence. I would also start to take the steps necessary to show China that when they start blocking our exports, that we will stand up for ourselves. But I will agree with you, Ms. May. The two Canadians who are held illegally in China must be the focus of our concern. We need a reset in our relationship, and it starts with having a Prime Minister that stands up for Canada.
But if you cancel fossil fuel subsidies, which Stephen Harper promised he would do in 2009, it would have an effect on dozens of state-owned enterprises from the People's Republic of China, like the partial owners, PetroChina, Kitimat, owning part of the LNG project, Canada LNG it's called. We're throwing $220 million at that.
I have been very clear that I do not support a free trade deal with China at this time because of the role of state-owned enterprises in their economy.
But we're already committed, thanks to Stephen Harper's cabinet, which passed it under royal prerogative.
You're misunderstanding what a Foreign Investment Protection Act means.
No, I'm afraid you haven't read the Canada-China Investment Treaty.
It gives Canadian businesses and investors the same types of protections.
No, it doesn't.
It is essential.
It's
essential.
No, you have to read.
We can't do business with another country if our investors don't have the same protections.
You need to read what those who understand this agreement. It froze in place all of the discriminatory practices towards Canadian enterprises while giving the People's Republic of China state-owned enterprises the right in secret tribunals to bring charges against Canada and seek arbitration damages. And the first 6 months under this agreement lets them lean on us in diplomatic forms in closed doors, behind closed doors.
The situation right now with two Canadians being detained in China in deplorable conditions is something that we've got to focus in on. It's something that requires all of us working together to ensure that they're returned safely, that they're treated in a dignified and humane way. There's been lots of concerns about that. That should be a focus. But when we talk about trade, I think it's important, whether it's with China or any other nation, we've got to look at the goal of our trade deals. So far, the trade deals that I've seen have focused on free trade without really benefiting workers. I grew up in Windsor, and I saw what free trade did. Unfettered free trade without protecting workers meant that the kids that I went to school with, their parents used to have great jobs in the auto manufacturing sector. They lost those jobs, and they're struggling because it wasn't a focus on making sure workers have a good opportunity.
Free trade.
That's got to be our focus.
We're even subsidizing projects that outsource thousands of jobs.
Free trade. Good jobs for workers.
Free trade with the United States creates billions of dollars of economic activity, creates well-paying jobs for hundreds of thousands of Canadians all
Might
across the
benefit
country.
the people at the
And if
top, but it doesn't help people every day. We see our manufacturing sector has been hollowed out.
You talk to the people who
Yeah,
are making parts.
I feel this one petering out a little bit. So let's go on to the next question, and it's for Andrew Scheer, the leader of the Conservative Party. Mr. Scheer, in 2017, you wrote on Twitter that you were pro-Brexit before it was cool. Are you still pro-Brexit now that it isn't?
I'm always in favor of countries being able to chart their own destiny and control their own internal affairs. And it is now up to British lawmakers and the British people to determine what happens next. My focus is on restoring Canada's place in the world. We just talked about the difficulties that we're having with China. It's no wonder that the government of China doesn't take Justin Trudeau seriously. After he clowned around in India and after he accepted concession after concession after concession to Donald Trump without getting any wins back for Canada, it's no wonder that Canada has lost its place in the world under Justin Trudeau. I will restore the dignity of our country represented abroad by standing up for Canadian interests and representing Canada with strength when we face difficult encounters.
When you respond, Mr. Singh, I hope you'll stay on Brexit at least for a bit.
No, for sure. I mean, this is an issue where we're seeing that if you negotiate deals, deals that work in the benefit of the people that live in the country, we've seen massive benefits to having free-flowing trade between the European nations. They've done it in a way that's created benefit for workers. It's been beneficial for the people. That's how we've got to focus on trade. We have to make sure that it's done in a way that's fair. And what people have to strike the balance in Europe, they've done a good job of trying to strike the balance between making sure there's a free flow and people are able to have commerce, but doing it in a way that doesn't benefit the people at the very top and allow them to enrich themselves, but does it in a way that actually helps working people. And that's my focus. And with any trade deal, it's got to be a focus.
Yeah, let's talk
There's got
about
to be a focus on workers.
Yeah, I just say Brexit is a tragedy of enormous proportions. What's happened to our colleagues, the Parliament of Westminster, the people of the UK, is disastrous. The whole, and I want to get to something that may sound like I'm leaving Brexit, but Brexit was a manipulation of public opinion through the invasion of the privacy rights of Brits from things like Cambridge Analytica. It was mining data and making up lies that perfectly fit the people who would then hear those lies. So the referendum was won through deceit. We must, I hope and pray that my colleagues in the British Parliament, and I do have one Green colleague, Carolyn Lucas, that they find their way through this, because Boris Johnson's bullying efforts will not work. Thank goodness the Parliament at Westminster and its House of Lords managed to stick with the fundamentals, that he couldn't pull the plug and call an election. No one's tried that in the British Commonwealth since Stephen Harper.
I do want to get back to you, Mr. Scheer, and there's a reason why I asked this question besides that it was a pretty clever way to phrase it. And I want to stick up for the guy who's not here. Justin Trudeau has written out this whole 3-year process, and the result has been that when he meets a British Prime Minister, he's seen as the representative of a valued ally, Canada. And when he meets European leaders, whether in Brussels or in Paris or elsewhere, he's seen as a valued ally. By taking sides in a question like that, do you risk jeopardizing half of that delicate balance?
Well, keep in mind that Justin Trudeau himself expressed his position on the very same question, and that is what prompted me to express my opinion. If we want to talk about positions that leaders have had on different issues, I wish Justin Trudeau was here so I could ask him the question of what exactly about the basic dictatorship of China he admires. He said that on film, that when he was asked to pick of all the countries in the world, which country other than Canada he admired the most, he said the basic dictatorship of China. Now that we see what's going on and how he has handled Canada, I think we see a glimpse into his rationale on that. But I will always stand up for Canadian interests around the world. That includes being able to sign a free trade deal with the European Union, as the previous Conservative government did, and in the eventuality with the United Kingdom as well. That
what
is
I'm
something
concerned
that
about, but not surprised about, Paul, is that when Mr. Scheer talked about being pro-Brexit and he's had some association with yellow vesters, it seems to be this idea of this instilling fear in people. And really, the fear isn't in new Canadians arriving. There shouldn't be any fear in using language like defamatory language towards people who are seeking asylum because they're fearing persecution. Really, the reason why we're in a difficult position in Canada is because decisions have been made that benefited the wealthy and the powerful. Now, corporations continue to enjoy massive loopholes and tax benefits that everyday people don't have. That's where we should put our focus, not on the idea that new people coming to our country are somehow a threat. And that's kind of the sentiment behind why Mr. Scheer uses this type of language around being pro-Brexit, being closely affiliated with yellow investors. These are the type of things that instill fear. We believe in opportunity and coming people come together.
That's just absolutely not true. The Conservative Party and I will, as Prime Minister, continue to ensure that Canada has an immigration system that welcomes people from all around the world. We must do so based on 3 important pillars. Our system must be fair, it must be orderly, and it must be compassionate. That has been my position, and it is very disingenuous for you to try to mischaracterize that.
So you will revoke the Safe Third Country Agreement with the United States? Right now we're sending people away, and in the House I've heard you say it, Andrew, you act as if people are illegals when they come here as refugees. Under international refugee conventions, people have every right to come and claim refugee status.
Ms. May, I'm sorry. There's nothing compassionate about forcing people to wait longer who are in refugee camps in places where there is civil war, where they will be killed if they leave those camps, where they have to wait longer because some people are skipping the line and jumping the queue and coming into Canada.
There's no queue for refugees. There is no queue for refugees.
I think what we've established here is that my invitation to discuss Brexit did not go over well with this crowd, and that's fair. There are so many issues in foreign affairs that it sounds like you could have a whole other debate on foreign affairs, and I'm given to understand there's a project like that on the table.
I'm not sure if Justin Trudeau will show up for that either.
Well, I hope
he showed up for people in 4 years.
I hope it continues, whoever shows up. We've got one last question in this whole debate. It goes to Elizabeth May of the Green Party. Ms. May, you've called for shifting Canada's focus and funding away from NATO. But given Vladimir Putin's military muscle flexing and the other strains on European unity, doesn't NATO increasingly look like a pillar of the peaceful post-war order that Canada should be doing everything it can to support?
I think that the question is based on a twisting of an answer I gave to a colleague at CBC, perhaps.
It was based on your interview with Vashi.
Yeah, what I said was that our interest in NATO should be to transfer NATO's interest towards nuclear disarmament. We have a real threat to global survival. The only thing that can outpace the climate disaster as a threat to human survival is nuclear war. Canada has not signed the UN treaty to abolish nuclear weapons. We are part of NATO. NATO is a shared defense alliance, but we need to make sure it's working in the interests of our future, and that means we need to engage NATO to be part of an effort to counter the disastrous situation that Trump and Putin want to undo the work of Reagan and Gorbachev. So this is a significant concern. We also believe that the Canadian military should be properly funded. We don't have surveillance on our Arctic shores. We don't have anyone there to intercept Russian vessels that land, and they do land. People come ashore, and we have absolutely no capacity to deal with that.
2 current elements of Canada's current NATO policy. One is the Canada-led battle group in Latvia. You support that?
We would review all of our NATO commitments because we also need to ensure we have the resources to pull ourselves out of 59th in the world as a contributor to UN peacekeeping. We need to operate within UN-sanctioned efforts where there are real crises around the world and hot spots where we're not pulling our weight. 59th in the world for peacekeeping isn't good enough. So we would review, not pull out.
The other is the plan to increase military spending by about half to get closer to meeting NATO targets?
NATO targets aren't as important to the Greens as the target that was accepted by Canada to 0.7% of our GDP to overseas development assistance. Peace and security in the world is much more won by ensuring that girls are educated, people are fed, and that the festering hotspots of the world get the effort to keep a sustainable peace in place. We have to be the anti-Trump in the world, and that means not flexing military muscle half as much as making sure we meet the SDG Sustainable Development Goals.
Andrew Scheer on Canada's NATO commitments.
Well, I believe it's essential that Canada is a full partner in NATO, and that means meeting our targets for over time getting to that 2% target. It's essential that we are there to show support for our allies. There are dangerous areas throughout the world and throughout Europe as well. We've seen what's happened in Ukraine as the government of Russia, Vladimir Putin's regime has ignored the sovereignty of Ukraine and is in the process of annexing part of Ukraine. I wear as a badge of honor that I am the only party leader who is currently banned from entering Russia because of my support for Ukraine. A Conservative government under my leadership will ensure that Canada is supporting Ukraine with real materials that will help them fight against Russian aggression. We will also ensure that we meet our targets. And I have to note that under Justin Trudeau's leadership, Canada has not been able to give our men and women in uniform the equipment they deserve. We are now in a situation where we have replaced our 40-year-old CF-18s with 40-year-old F-18s from Australia. He has completely bungled our procurement process for our armed forces. I will fix it.
We may agree on that, but I think in fairness, we should also acknowledge the bravery of Chrystia Freeland, who, as our Minister for Global Affairs, is also banned by Putin and used to live and work in Russia. She took quite a lot of chances.
Justin Trudeau,
but
needs to explain, Justin Trudeau needs to explain why he attempted to normalize relations with the Putin regime. And I wish he was here
I looked at your policies on foreign policy today, Andrew, and I realized if anyone wants to know where you stand, just figure out what Trump wants. Because you want to move our embassy to Jerusalem, take our role away as being an honest broker in that part of the world. You want to join with the U.S. and build an anti-ballistic missile system. So you will do what Trump wants. You might as well be. He might as well be the ventriloquist, and you're Charlie McCarthy.
That's just false.
Well, I mean,
let's give Scheer a chance to respond, and then Mr. Singh.
Sure. No, look, I have continually advocated for Canada to be a full partner in NATO. I believe that we should not sign away our sovereignty on our foreign affairs, which is what Justin Trudeau did when he signed NAFTA and conceded a huge concession to the United States on future trade deals and on exports of certain Canadian products. I believe that Canada must recognize that in the conflict in the Middle East, there is only one side that tries to minimize human casualties, and that is Israel. We have an obligation to support the democratic state of Israel, the place in the region where people have the most freedom, and absolutely I will be an unapologetic defender
so it's
of the
not
right
okay
of
when Russia occupies Crimea, but it's okay for Israel to occupy Palestine.
Just to pick up a point that Ms. May brought up, that Mr. Scheer seems to be willing to do whatever it takes to support and continue Trump's policies. That to me does not show strength. If we want to be strong, this is a massive failure of Mr. Trudeau, and I pick up on Ms. May's point. A massive failure of Mr. Trudeau is to not stand up to a leader of a country, Mr. Trump, who is stripping kids from the arms of their parents. To not call that out for the shameful act that it is shows weakness. And the fact that Mr. Scheer stands here today and is not willing to condemn Mr. Trump for his horrible treatment of other human beings, of other fellow brothers and sisters, is another example of how he is no stronger than Mr. Trudeau and cannot provide the strength of leadership that we need. We need someone who's willing to call out injustices around the world. Will you call out Mr. Trump? I don't think so. You don't have the courage to do so. I do. You need to be strong. Okay. And that means calling out injustices.
Let's talk about one
at a time, and because he's taken a lot of accusations.
Let's talk about Canada's funding under Justin Trudeau, funding UNRWA, a United Nations organization that is funding elements within the Middle East that foment and encourage anti-Semitism and
they run schools in permanent settlement refugee camps for 70 years.
I will pull the funding from UNRWA and ensure that Canadian taxpayers' dollars are not going to advocate terrorist activity.
They run schools, Andrew. I have been to the schools. I went there with 18 MPs from our Canada-Palestinian Parliamentary Friendship Group, and it is terrifying to see a small school where an illegal, I'm sorry, but it's illegal appropriation of Palestinian land for giant infrastructure of a big community where there were soldiers in the olive grove. The children throw rocks. The Israeli soldiers are there armed to the teeth. It is a terrifying situation. It's a humanitarian crisis. And the reality is Israel, I stand absolutely foursquare for Israel, but Mr. Netanyahu's policies are a danger to the region.
There is one side in the conflict that tries to maximize human casualties, and there is one side that tries to minimize human casualties. I will always ensure that Canada is there to support the state of Israel and its right to exist.
I was worried at the beginning of this debate that there wouldn't be enough clear distinctions among parties. I think at the end of the debate, I don't have to worry as much anymore. Thank you very much for your contribution, everybody. You've heard the debate, and now it's time for the final pitches for your vote. Each leader will now have 90 seconds to make a final statement. We've drawn lots for the order, and we'll hear first from Elizabeth May.
Thank you, and I want to thank Citytv and Maclean's for giving us this opportunity, just barely 24 hours into the writ period. Who knew? And I also want to say to every Canadian who's watching tonight, please consider voting Green this time. I will be enormously honored to have you give us a serious consideration. Look at our full platform, look at our policies, and look at the fact that we will be issuing a fully costed budget that has been reviewed by the Parliamentary Budget Office. We are serious about what we are proposing. We know Canada can do this. We can bring in universal pharmacare. We can ensure affordable housing. We can make sure our kids can afford to go to university by eliminating tuition. We can pay for these things, and we can stimulate our economy through a transformation that the likes of which Canada hasn't seen since we came into our own as a modern country in the era of the Second World War. The time for status quo decision-making is over. The time for status quo, short-term politics, where every party goes out to beat their own drum and kick the others in the shins, is over. It's time to find common ground where we can work together, because Canada isn't a country divided. We're one family. We care about each other. Every Canadian cares about an Albertan who's worrying about their job. Every Canadian cares about a British Columbian who can't breathe because of smoke. We care for each other. We have to think and work together like the country the best we can be.
Thank you, Elizabeth May. Andrew Scheer.
This election is coming down to one simple question. Who do you trust to make life more affordable so that you can get ahead? Everywhere I travel in this country, I hear from so many Canadians who tell me that they're working harder and harder, but they're barely getting by. Life is getting more expensive, and Justin Trudeau is making it worse. He's raised taxes on over 80% of Canadian middle-class families. His carbon tax is raising the cost of everything from home heating to gasoline and groceries. And his massive deficits today will mean higher taxes right after the election when he doesn't need your vote, but he still needs your money. I have a plan for a government that will live within its means so that we can leave more money in your pocket, because it's time for you to get ahead. I have already announced that I will cancel Justin Trudeau's carbon tax. I will remove the GST and HST from home heating and energy bills, and I will make maternity leave benefits tax-free. And throughout this campaign, we will be unveiling more ideas, more policies, more proposals that will put more money back in your pocket for you, for your kids, or for your retirement. What we know is that we cannot trust Justin Trudeau. He has broken promises, broken the law, and lied to Canadians about it. And his policies will make life more expensive. Ours will make life more affordable, because it's time for you to get ahead. On October 21st, I'm asking for your support so that we can restore ethics and integrity to this government and improve and lower the cost of living for all Canadians.
Thank you, Mr. Scheer. Jagmeet Singh.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, folks, for sticking with us this long. When we look at Ottawa, we look at the governments in Ottawa, and we look at the decisions they've made. Whether it's been Liberal like Mr. Trudeau, or before that Conservative like Mr. Harper, the decisions that governments make have always seemed to benefit those at the very top, the powerful corporate interests, and have made life harder for everyone else. So I ask you this simple question. This election comes down to this question. Who's going to fight for you? Who's going to stand up for you? New Democrats, we're not in it for the rich. We don't work for the powerful and wealthy. We work for you. So we can tackle the problems that we're faced with, the problems like housing. We can tackle unaffordable housing, the housing crisis, but only if we have the courage to take on money launderers and speculators and invest in building 500,000 new affordable homes. We can tackle the problems when it comes to medication, people who can't afford medication. We can expand our Medicare and include medication coverage for all, pharmacare for all, but only if we have the courage to take on big pharma and the powerful interest groups that don't want it. We can tackle the climate crisis and make sure young people have a bright future, but only if we have the courage to take on the big polluters and end fossil fuel subsidies. There is a bright future that's possible. You need someone who's in it for you. New Democrats don't fight for the powerful and the wealthy. We fight for you. We're in it for you. And on October 21st, I ask for your support so we can continue to fight for you, not the powerful, but for the people.
Thank you, Jagmeet Singh. Well, that concludes the first debate of this campaign. I want to thank the leaders for taking part tonight, and I want to wish every one of you a good luck on the campaign trail. We've been inviting Canadians to take part in our discussions on social media, and that debate continues, as does reaction. So let's go back to City News senior political correspondent Cynthia Mulligan.
All right, Paul, thank you very much. Let's get back to our analysis here. Did any of the leaders here gain more voters this evening?
I would say, and I mean, you know, being the token commie on the panel, like you probably know that I'm going to say that you know, Jagmeet Singh really shone in this debate, but he really did.
He really did.
I think
Absolutely.
Going in, he had the most to gain. He really showed himself. He first of all, I think it was really effective of him to show what divisions exist between the NDP and the Green Party, because I think for a lot of Canadians who aren't as familiar with those two parties, it's whichever whichever group turns you off the least is the one that gets your vote. And I think he did some really good work drawing a distinction between those two parties.
What I loved in that last segment was when Jagmeet Singh went after Andrew Scheer on the United States. and Scheer refused to criticize Donald Trump, and Mr. Singh was talking about the children who were put in cages. That was a lost opportunity for Mr. Scheer, for sure. And Jagmeet, absolutely, with Justin Trudeau not there, he really shone tonight.
Singh was good. He had one minor lapse. I didn't hear him much where he deflected a question on support for LNG in BC. Maybe people in British Columbia might have noticed that. I doubt it'll resonate very far. But I think he was the clear winner here tonight. I guess one of the questions you have to ask about Andrew Scheer is whether he could really afford to mix it up very much with the two people in the studio with him, because he really has to fight Justin Trudeau. So in a way, he was hamstrung, and in the way he could be combative.
There were some interesting dynamics, Amanda, going on here, because Singh needed to pull votes away from the Green Party as well as Trudeau. Scheer wants Singh to do well because it's in his best interest to pull votes away from the Liberals. How do you think that all played out?
Yeah, I think what we saw was Scheer was looking at the camera, right, speaking directly to voters, trying to kind of be calm. Like, he had a very even tone throughout the debate, where you saw Singh sort of mix it up a lot more. So I think that's why we had him. He wanted to be prime ministerial in waiting, right? And you have to be the calm guy at the fight. You don't want to pick a fight with a third party because you don't want to make them irrelevant. I agree. I thought Singh did much better than I anticipated he was going to. I actually think...
Is it enough to jumpstart his campaign? Because they've been struggling lately.
I think people love a comeback, right? So we've already seen some of this narrative of them building up. I think it's going to be fascinating to see Singh versus Trudeau in the debate, right? Because like basically we just had a practice round and how they're going to go at each other. So Scheer needs to stay calm. I think a little more emotion out of him would have been good. And I think hopefully they keep kind of Elizabeth May, not too mixed up, but I thought Scheer did what he needed to do. Singh did very well, and we'll see how it goes.
Interesting to think of Justin Trudeau, Cynthia, watching this and thinking, okay, I have to watch out for Jagmeet Singh, obviously.
Well, he
gets a good preview of what their styles are going to be.
Now, let's talk about how Scheer consistently moved the dial over to criticizing Justin Trudeau. We're just going to run some tape on that, some examples of how he was always taking it back to slamming Justin Trudeau.
Justin Trudeau promised that the budget would be balanced. I think we can all agree that Justin Trudeau is afraid of his record. We're also going to eliminate wasteful Liberal spending, like the $250 million that Justin Trudeau sent the Asian Infrastructure Bank. That is Justin Trudeau's corruption scandal. He is the only prime minister that has ever been convicted of breaking the law, and he lied about it. So I want to use this opportunity to again call on Justin Trudeau to do the right thing. We are falling as a country further behind our targets under Justin Trudeau's carbon tax.
So the key question, was that effective? Did it hurt Justin Trudeau tonight?
Not attending?
Not attending, but what Scheer was trying to do.
Listen, I think what Scheer needed to do was talk and attack Justin Trudeau and talk directly to voters, which we saw him do consistently. I think obviously Trudeau's presence would have been a little easier to do that, but he had to keep that sort of level head. I'd like to see him mix it up and get a bit more aggressive, but I also think we needed to see, like, where was Jagmeet Singh kind of going after Trudeau? He really turned his guns on Scheer a lot more than I thought he was going to.
Right. Why don't we pull up Justin Trudeau? He was speaking in Edmonton. We'll just, even though he wasn't here, we're going to give him a little bit of a say tonight.
Conservatives like to say they're for the people, but then they cut taxes for the wealthy and cut services for everybody else. Other than deciding that they might need to smile more, they have no new ideas for Canadians. They still think you can cut your way to prosperity. But as Canadians know, that's the wrong approach to take. That's why we chose to move Canada forward by investing in families, in workers, and in communities, and by having faith in Canadians.
So that is a familiar refrain by Justin Trudeau. He's invoking Doug Ford, talking about for the people, which Doug Ford uses that phrase all the time. Only Jagmeet Singh brought up the specter of Doug Ford here, who is the Achilles heel for Andrew Scheer in Ontario. Do you think were you surprised that Ford's name wasn't mentioned more, John?
A little bit. It's interesting that it's not just Ford, right? Justin Trudeau in ads and other points, he's running against Ford, Harper, Trump. He mentions them as much as he does directly Andrew Scheer so far. So it's an interesting kind of dynamic where we're really seeing him thinking, obviously, that Scheer's persona isn't as well defined as the three people he'd like to associate him with.
Well, if he had been at the debate, then he could have differentiated himself from them more.
That's
because the amount of corporate cronyism that Donald Trump is, we're well aware of that. If he'd been able to be at the debate, he could have explained himself a little bit on SNC level, and he could explain the fact that of the Canadian families and corporations named in the Paradise Papers, now how many of them been prosecuted? How many of them are the CRA publicly going after?
But at the end of the day, I think Justin Trudeau is exactly where he should have been tonight, not at the debate, which is being held in Toronto. He already holds Toronto, so he needs to be out in other parts of the country where he can get in front of voters. We've seen it on the clip. He is a great campaigner despite all the baggage he's lugging around.
I'm going to have to pause it there, and we're going to throw to Melanie back in the City Newsroom. Mel.
Thank you so much for that, Cynthia. I want to bring back in Aaron Brindle, trends expert with Google Canada. What have Canadians been searching about over the last couple hours?
Well, we saw some issues really break through this evening. Probably the top trending issue over the course of the debate was climate change.
Kind of
like throughout the entire debate, climate change kept coming up. SNC-Lavalin, issues related to SNC-Lavalin, obviously was one of the big issues that came up as well.
And as you said, it was mentioned more than once.
More than once.
More
That's
than
right.
once. Interest over time, when you do a breakdown, when it comes to time, you see certain peaks and valleys.
That's right. So what we're looking at here is a trends graph of Google search interest in the leaders. And you'll notice that red line kind of dominated throughout the course of the debate. Those are searches for Justin Trudeau. And you'll notice the peak was the highest at the very beginning, right when...
Where is he?
Yes, and we saw searches related to where is Justin Trudeau. But you see that delta between Justin Trudeau and the other leaders begin to narrow over the course of the debate. And you'll even see Andrew Scheer, who's represented in blue, begin to eclipse Justin Trudeau near the end.
When we take a look at geography, Aaron,
Sure.
we break it down by region, what people are mentioning and where.
Yeah, so I think we saw the most amount of searches for Justin Trudeau out west this evening. He was in Alberta today, and you can see that as you begin to kind of scroll down, you'll see these searches where Justin Trudeau is dominated out west, whereas here in when you look at Andrew Scheer, you'll see that searches were kind of largest for him in Saskatchewan. If you keep scrolling down, you'll see that Jagmeet Singh, you'll see popularity in Ontario, these sorts of things. So there was a fair bit of geographic differentiation in terms of search interest.
Absolutely. I should mention also on Twitter, it was the #1 trend all night long. In fact, I believe it's still trending #1 across Canada, the hashtag first debate. And we'll break it down even further, maybe on social media outside of this broadcast, what exactly people were looking for when it came to the leaders, because there's so much when it comes to these issues and the leaders themselves.
That's right.
Okay, Aaron, thank you so much
It's my
for
pleasure.
that. We're going to check in with Courtney Theriault now in Edmonton.
Thank you very much. We are here on Treaty 6 land, the Enoch Cree Nation at the River Cree Resort. And with 6 chiefs, the quick question for you, we did an informal poll. Not one of you felt that Andrew Scheer took this evening. So the question to you is, what did he say or not say to fail to earn your support?
Well, for myself, he answered the questions, but he wasn't thorough in them. He was just kind of wishy-washy, and he didn't get right to the basis of the question. He should just answer the question and then go from there and be clear about it, and he didn't do that.
Is that the consensus? Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Second question, it would be about the empty podium tonight. Justin Trudeau, obviously in Edmonton, not at the debate. 4 years ago, he said that he would right a lot of the wrongs against Indigenous people. I think it's probably safe to say a bit of a mixed bag with those results. But how does he look tonight compared to what we heard on that stage?
Well, I think he looks pretty good. He's here in Treaty 6 territory right now, and he's the most searched leader at this point without even showing up, so he looks pretty good. The other leaders didn't stand out, especially Mr. Scheer, who seems to even make himself look more detrimental when it comes to Indigenous issues. Justin Trudeau, as much as he's struggled, he's still invested a lot of capital into different First Nations, and we see that. It's just not the story being told, but he still has a long way to go when it comes to Indigenous issues. But at this point, him not showing up tonight, he still looks pretty good.
Is that the universal agreement here on the table? All right, and then one final question here. We've heard about the United Nations Declaration. We heard about the Human Rights Tribunal, and there was cursory mention about First Nation infrastructure. So those were the key issues tonight. But what do you want to hear over the course of the next 38 days from all 4 leaders with respect to Indigenous issues? What was missed tonight?
Well, I think, unfortunately, what's always missed, not just tonight, but in past, we have something to say on every issue. We have something to say on economy. We have something to say on energy and environment. We have something to say on
every issue that impacts Canadians in Canada, we're being marginalized by just have one topic under Indigenous issues. I think we should be included on every topic, whether it's climate change, environment, energy, foreign affairs. We should be included in all that discussion.
Well, and hopefully over the course of the next 38 days, that will be the case. A big thank you to the chiefs here from Treaty 6 for coming in tonight to have this discussion with us. Hopefully this will be top of mind for Canadians as they head to the polls October 21st. That's it for us here on Treaty 6 territory, just west of Edmonton right now. We'll turn things back over to Cynthia.
All right, Courtney, thank you very much. One thing I would love to discuss with each of you is Bill 21 and the response to Bill 21. John.
That's a tough issue for federal leaders because, frankly, the bill is popular in Quebec, and so,
everybody wants the seats in Quebec.
Yeah, so we heard some good talk, but not good declarations of intent here from people tonight. I thought Singh is poignant on it for obvious reasons. It has to cut close to the heart for him. But I don't think we're going to see anybody move very far on that because I think the polls in Quebec are clear. It's a popular measure in Quebec. It's a horrible measure. I think it's terrible that there isn't more outspokenness from federal leaders, but I don't see it as an issue that's differentiating the parties on the federal stage right now.
Andre?
Frankly, this is embarrassing.
I agree.
You know, what kind of country are we supposed to be exactly? Are we a country that values diversity and multiculturalism and all these other buzzwords that we throw out? Do we actually value people's human rights? Do we believe that people should be able to freely exercise their religion to the extent that it doesn't harm anybody else? We keep saying that, and yet an entire province has declared that all those rights are null and void for you if you outwardly wear your religious expression, except one. That's absolute garbage. I can't accept. I can't accept anything other than we are going to fight this this oppressive move against people's human rights. Apparently, if we're all Canadians, I think we should all be able to come to the same conclusion that if you are of a different background, race, religion, creed, etc., then your outward expression of that marginalization or of that racialization or of what your religion is should not be punished by any sort of public agency, least of all the government that's sworn to protect you.
Let's end, we just have a minute or so left on the SNC-Lavalin. Is it going to haunt Justin Trudeau and hurt him throughout this campaign?
Well, I think it's been on the front page, right? I mean, the first day of the election campaign, there was more issues about it. Is it complicated? Yes. But I think we're going to see the Conservatives use it in advertising and maximize it. I think it's going to continue to dog Trudeau on the campaign trail.
His polls dipped considerably over the summer, but they have gone back up. Do you think voters have come to terms with it?
I don't think they come to terms with it. I think there was less focus on it, right? And now I think there's going to be more pressure applied from the other parties. I think there's going to be more pressure applied by journalists. Obviously, the Globe and Mail has not given up on this story. I'm going to guess there's more to come.
All right. On that note, thank you very much to my amazing panel here. We are going to wrap up. Thank you so much for watching our election debate, co-hosted by City and Maclean's. You can watch online as the leaders now talk about how they felt they did during this election campaign on citynews.ca. Thanks again for watching. See you on election night, October 21st.
Are you worried that comments criticizing other world leaders may set the stage for impediments to foreign relations if you were to assume office?
I don't. I didn't say anything pejorative about anyone. The reality of it is that Pierre Trudeau used to make it very clear he didn't go along with U.S. foreign policy. U.S. presidents didn't like him very much. I have worked with world leaders. I know Mikhail Gorbachev. I know Bill Clinton. I think that world leaders will recognize Canada when they have a leader who actually understands diplomacy, international affairs, and at some point, when someone like President Trump appears to encourage his own citizens to shoot immigrants, it's wrong not to let him know that that's unacceptable, and we need to revoke the Safe Third Country Agreement with the U.S.
Ms. Mayor, Bill seemed more interested in debating Justin Trudeau tonight. He didn't really seem to engage with either you or Mr. Singh, barely looked at you often. Why do you think that was?
Well, I think because all of us want to debate Justin Trudeau and hold him to account for, I don't call them broken promises. Electoral reform wasn't a broken promise, it was a massive betrayal. But I did feel that we engaged with Mr. Scheer. He wanted to deny that his foreign policy was written by Donald Trump. I think it's outrageous to suggest that Canada would lose our possible role as an honest broker in the Middle East by following along with Trump and moving our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That's a very bad idea.
On Bill 21, none of the leaders on the stage were willing to endorse a federal intervention on a bill that I think you all agree is a huge issue in terms of freedom of religion. Is that not just because you're all seeking votes in Quebec, and that fundamentally, do you not understand how people might see that as crass politics?
That's what look, the Bill 21 is clearly a very divisive issue within Canada and divisive within Quebec. I like trying to find common ground and solutions. I respect the fact that the National Assembly passed Bill 21, but we had from the very outset said that we found it unacceptable, discriminatory, and damaging to human rights. So if the Green Party is not going to get a lawyer and intervene in court, clearly not. As Prime Minister, looking at how this might come through to get to higher courts, we'd take a fresh look and see how the legislation goes through the courts. But we do support human rights, and that's why I'm trying to find a solution to ensure that any worker who is affected by this bill, so that they lose a job because of their religion, would find a job very quickly because the federal government can find work for them in the federal departments within Quebec.
You want to hector the president of the U.S. on his treatment of people in his country, but you won't stand up for religious minorities in Quebec.
I will stand up for religious minorities in Quebec, but I don't want to put the unity of this country in any risk whatsoever. It's not about votes. It's about I don't want to spark again. I'm older than most everybody here. I remember the separatist votes. I remember when the separatist movement had spark and life and push. And right now, even the Bloc Québécois members of Parliament with whom I serve in Parliament don't talk about separation. They talk about respect for Quebec within the Federation.
What about
That's
Mr.
what I'm doing.
Nantel? Will Mr. Nantel remain a member of the party?
He also respects Quebec within Canada. He's not.
He's a sovereignty.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. That's time.
Check his website for clarification.
We checked today. He's still in soccer.
Thank you. That's time.
I'm not allowed to do that. Boy, would I love to. Sorry.
Like, for real. I don't care that it's a 9 minutes. That was a great question. Finalement. Yeah. Hey, buddy. How's it going? Nice to meet you. She gets she's a great, she's pretty good person. Yeah, she goes on. You're willing to put aside a lot of disbelief. It's not possible that I'm like weirdly compelled. Yeah. It's actually a really impressive feat. I'm not sure we could mine for water on Mars, but you know what, Liz? Like, I'm going with it. Please, probably a hot thing. They also were gotta start kicking down doors. I'm here for fighting crime. We all know they all go to head to meals in the soup kitchen. So their alter egos if they're kicking around 1 in the morning. Liz Maid is gonna hang out, go to the village, just get a drink at the strip club. Everybody fucking.
I'm one. I'm not one. Yeah. Add me to your phone.
Isn't this great? Did you know we both realize how much fun we have when we're apart for just 48 hours. Vacations don't do it. Time with other colleagues do.
Also,
I do appreciate that. Sorry, sure.
It's just Richard Madden doing all this talking. Taking all these remarks, he's back in Canada. Let me know that.
Paul Maclean's here too.
oh yeah, you get
This is back desk. No, Are you working What? Are you working?
Almost. Can't wait to get home and see where the dog is shitting pissed around. Exactly.
Oh, here's the press release. I'm sure you're supposed to say
The Conservative Party bizarro Finty.
So my question is, why are you so
First question.
Yes.
Mr. Scheer, on Bill 21, of all the leaders, I think you were probably the softest on it. You suggest. I think it's a freedom of religion issue, and if so, why does the federal government not have a role to play in stopping it?
Well, I disagree. My response highlighted the Conservative Party's commitment to individual liberty and fundamental human rights. That is something that that a Conservative government under my leadership will always stand up for and always promote. I've made my views on this issue, and our party has had our position on this particular piece of legislation known. And I also indicated that those who are affected by it or oppose it in Quebec are using the courts, as is their right, to oppose it, and the courts will ultimately decide on it.
But Ms. May offered quite an alternative, was to just find a way to give them jobs with some sort of federal action. Do you have any policy as to some sort of way to help those who would be affected if the courts in this particular channel?
I wasn't very clear on exactly what she was proposing in that. As I said, we're not. This is not something that we would ever pursue at a federal level. This is not a piece of policy that we would ever implement at the federal level. Our party has always been the party of human rights, fundamental freedoms, and now the people who are opposed to this law or affected by this law will be using the courts, as is their right, and the courts will ultimately decide.
Mr. Chair, do you feel that your party is consistent with the abortion debate? You have members in your party who've expressed wanting to bring forward anti-abortion legislation. So you've said your piece on it, but do you believe what you say is consistent throughout the party?
Absolutely. Nothing on this issue has changed for our party. We are the only party that recognizes that people have the right to their own particular view or their own opinion, but we will not be reopening up this issue. That is something I've been very clear. I will oppose any efforts to open up this debate, but I will predict that Justin Trudeau and the Liberals will continue to try to use this issue to divide Canadians and cover up from their own scandal and corruption. This is not a surprise. They're going to continue to do this, but our position on this is clear. Once and for all, again, I will state, the party will not reopen up this issue, and I will oppose any effort that may do so.
J'essaie de comprendre sur la loi 21, j'essaie de comprendre jobs in other provinces. Is that something that you would do?
I wasn't exactly clear on exactly what she was talking about, what that proposal would be, so I'll leave it for Tara to explain that.
J'essaie de comprendre votre position sur la loi 21 au Québec. Vous dites, on veut défendre, on est le parti de la charte, mais vous n'êtes pas prêt à prendre des actions en cours pour la défendre. C'est contradictoire.
Non, pas du tout. Nous sommes le parti qui respecte et appuie les droits fondamentaux de tous les Canadiens. Nous sommes le parti, c'était un premier ministre conservateur qui a écrit
Mais allez-vous prendre des actions sur la loi pour défendre?
Comme j'ai dit, on n'a aucune intention d'intervenir dans ce cas. Les Québécois et Québécoises qui sont contre ce projet de loi ont fait un appel dans les cours et finalement les cours vont trancher sur ce sujet.
Mr. Chair, what do you make of Maxime Bernier not being invited to this debate and not being invited to the other consortium debates?
I will leave it to those who are responsible for putting these debates together to make those decisions. I know that the thresholds have been set on people who have leaders of parties who have elected MPs and have the prospect of obtaining seats in this election. I will participate in debates that I have been invited to where other leaders will be present. That's why I was here. I was very disappointed that Justin Trudeau didn't take the time to show up. It's not surprising though, given his record. It makes perfect sense why he would want to minimize his participation in debates, and I have no doubt that's the reason why he's refusing to participate in other debates.
You previously declined to comment on Doug Ford's leadership in Ontario. Tonight you made a comparison between Mr. Trudeau and former Premier Kathleen Wynne. Will you now talk about your opinion of the comparisons being made between you and Mr. Ford and your opinion of his governance in Ontario?
I am focused on holding Justin Trudeau to account for his record. When people bring up the situation in Ontario, of course I remind them that it was Kathleen Wynne and Delta McGuinty that ran scandal-plagued governments with massive deficits that led to higher taxes and threats on social services. That is the exact same playbook that Justin Trudeau is following federally. And Canadians and Ontarians have an opportunity this election to ensure that Justin Trudeau can't do to Canada what Kathleen Wynne and Delta McGuinty did to Ontario.
The question was specifically about Doug Ford, and Jagmeet Singh brought it up a number of times tonight.
Because they're desperate to run this election against anybody but myself. This election is about holding Justin Trudeau to account for his policies, for his tax hikes, for his measures that have made life less affordable and more expensive. That is the record that is on that Canadians will pass judgment on October 21st.
But Mr. Chair, Ontario is critically important to this election.
Absolutely.
Doug Ford is the premier. Do you consider Doug Ford an asset to your political aspirations or a detriment to your?
I believe that the people in Ontario know what happens when Liberals are allowed to govern for long periods of time with massive tax hikes, corruption scandals, and huge deficits that put pressure on social services. That is why we have an opportunity to limit the damage that Justin Trudeau can do to Canada to only 4 years. I believe that the people of Ontario understand that. That's why they voted out the scandal-plagued, tax-hiking, deficit-running Liberal government provincially, and I believe that they will do the same thing federally on October 21st.
With Elizabeth May over duty to consult Indigenous groups on pipelines and energy projects. You wouldn't really say clearly when you would give First Nations groups the ability to say no to a project. Do you want to try that again and say, to what degree they'll have the ability to reject projects that First Nations groups don't want?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me answer this in two ways. First, specifically on the duty to consult. Courts have been very clear on this, that there is a duty to consult, and that is more than just ticking a box. It means that where there are concerns, valid concerns that can be addressed, that those concerns must be addressed. I will absolutely respect that. The second thing that I believe is very important to remember is that I am proposing an energy corridor which would take care of these types of consultations up front. Get the certainty that we need to provide investors so that they know that you can actually get something built in this country. Unfortunately, under Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, we are now a place where the only way to get something built is for the government to buy it, and even then, he hasn't been able to get it done.
Last question, guys.
Do you regret using language hold hostage? Ms. May and Mr. Singh both said that was inappropriate.
Well, when you have a small number of people or a small number of groups or a small number of communities who are blocking an important project that would provide thousands of jobs to Indigenous communities, and all those First Nations communities who have signed partnership agreements are left out, I believe that it's important to advocate for them as well. And part about respecting Indigenous rights means respecting their right to say yes. Thanks very much, everyone. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you all, guys. Thank you.
Breaks down the wall. Oh yeah.
Yep.
It was 10:15.
What the?
Move the set while Jagmeet
Yeah.
talking.
Oh,
And I.
Very comfortable in Twitter handle.
Trying to do it.
Actually, that's a fun short vote choice.
Did I buy? Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't know why you should take
I guess I'm sure. Yeah.
Okay, time in.
Mr. Singh,
Yes.
on LNG in BC, you really deflected on whether you support it as it stands right now. You said what you do support, what you don't support. Will you take just a hard line, yes or no, on LNG in BC the way that it is, at least right now?
But I can tell you, a couple of really important things. First off, I really believe that the future of energy in our country and in the world has to be where we're not fueling energy with carbon. That has to be the future, and that's where we've got to get to. To get there, what I can do at the federal level is ensure that we end all fossil fuel subsidies. That's my commitment. When it comes to the plan, BC has the best climate action plan in Canada, probably the best in North America, and amongst the best in the world. So we've got to support those good plans. What I don't support is the fact that in Canada, Mr. Trudeau does not have a plan that accounts for things like Trans Mountain, doesn't account for the threat to the coastline. So that's really my focus.
A yes or no on this, interesting. As it is right now, this sounds like a no. Like, it really does sound like a no. Is this a no as it's currently done right now?
I can just tell you really my values. On this one, I really believe we've got to end fossil fuel subsidies. I really believe we've got to support the plans that provinces are putting forward, like BC, one of the best ambitious plans, and that's how we move forward, and that's what I'm committed to doing.
Mr. Singh, on Bill 21, you said that you want to be a symbol for those who are affected by Bill 21. You've expressed sympathy for those who could lose their jobs or be discriminated against because of it, but you won't actually commit to doing anything specific, and your symbolism doesn't mean much in terms of the law that's on the books. Would you support an intervention in the court case ongoing right now on Bill 21?
Well, Bill 21 is something really important to me personally. When I think about what that means, I grew up as a kid being told again and again that I couldn't do things because of the way I look. And that's essentially what the government of Quebec is telling people growing up in Quebec right now. They're saying, because of the way you look, you can't be a teacher. Because of the way you look, you can't be a judge. That's wrong. It's divisive. It's hurtful. I'm running to become Prime Minister. I'm going to Quebec and speaking to Quebecers and saying, I love the French language. I love your identity and your culture. I will fight for you and defend you. This is a wrong bill. And I'm hoping my presence on that stage is a bold action to say, listen, what should we do for society if we want to promote the French language? You want a kid like me that grew up in Windsor that ended up falling in love with the language, learning it, and promoting it. That's the way we promote the identity.
Your place on stage does nothing for the bill as law. You saying you would actually fight it in court does. At a certain point, is this about winning votes in Quebec? How can people do this not just as a political ploy to win votes in Quebec?
It would be a lot easier for me to say that I think it's a good law. I'm saying it's a bad law. I'm saying it's a divisive law. And I'm going to Quebec and saying that. I'm not hiding from that. I think it's important to call it out. It's important to say how it hurts people. And I'm willing to do that.
Are you worried that federal legislation would stoke separatist? Miss May was saying she was worried maybe that could stoke separatist feelings. Are you worried about that too? Is that why you won't go there?
No, I think that there's jurisdiction, and I respect the jurisdiction that provinces have. I don't respect this law. I think it's a hurtful law, and that's why I've come out and said it's very divisive. I think it's also important that there's a current court challenge going on. And that court challenge is going to see its day in court. It's going through the process, and that's important. I support the right to challenge this in court. It's why we have a system that protects laws and protects rights, and it's going to see its day in court, and I support the right to do that.
Monsieur Singh, en français, il y a une cour d'appel aujourd'hui au Québec qui dit que les conducteurs de camions devant une confession sikh qui portent le turban ne pourront pas le porter parce qu'ils devront porter un casque de sécurité dans les zones où ils doivent se déplacer. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez du jugement et est-ce que dans ce genre de situation-là, vous croyez que le gouvernement a raison d'intervenir?
Donc encore, c'est une question d'identité et moi je crois qu'il faut défendre le droit d'avoir les identités diverses. C'est le droit de quelqu'un d'avoir de croyances et d'exprimer ses croyances. Donc dans mon avis, c'est vraiment le droit qu'il faut appuyer et il faut défendre. On a des lois qui les défendent les droits comme ça. Donc j'espère que les lois vont faire ce qu'ils font et c'est d'appuyer les droits.
Donc pour être clair, vous croyez que les camionneurs devraient pouvoir continuer de porter le turban et pas le casque de sécurité et un gouvernement fédéral les défendrait?
Je pense qu'on a déjà des lois qui défendent le droit de la personne. On a les lois qui existent au Québec. Les lois qui existent au Québec, une charte des droits de la personne, c'est une loi qui est tellement forte. J'ai beaucoup de confiance dans cette loi pour protéger le droit d'exprimer vos croyances. Donc, j'espère que cette loi va continuer de protéger ces droits.
Et les camionneurs, vous espérez qu'ils soient protégés par la charte?
Je pense qu'ils sont protégés et on va voir dans le cours de justice.
Mr. Scheer was Asked about what he would do facing deficits bigger than expected. What would you do? Cut spending or push back your target for a balanced budget?
So, I mean, our priorities are very different. I don't believe it makes sense to cut taxes for corporations or to give billions of dollars to corporations to fund a deficit. I believe we need to invest in people. So I wouldn't have done what Mr. Trudeau did, which is to give $14 billion to the wealthiest corporations in the last fall economic statement. He essentially gave $14 billion so that the wealthiest corporations could buy corporate jets and limousines. That's wrong. I wouldn't do that. I would spend our precious resources, use them very responsibly, but invest them into services that people need, like pharmacare for all, head-to-toe healthcare coverage, building affordable housing. That's my priority. I'm also, one last thing. I'm also prepared to increase revenue by closing tax loopholes, by ending offshore tax havens, and by imposing a super wealth tax so those who have over $20 million in fortune would pay their fair share.
Your stand on balancing the budget wasn't well received by Elizabeth May. Do you stand by what you say, and do you believe what you're saying is achievable?
Absolutely. I believe that what we need to do is put people as a priority. For too long in Ottawa, the priorities have been how do we make life easier for the richest, and that's meant that people pay the price. It costs people more when governments in Ottawa, liberal and conservative, make life easier for the rich. I want to change that. And I believe our focus should be on making sure there's good services for people. They have the things that they need in their life so they can live a good life, like quality housing, affordable education, making sure our healthcare system is there for them. And I don't believe that we should be cutting corners to give corporations massive loopholes. That's not the way to go ahead.
Elizabeth May said that unless climate change is a priority, she won't prop up not even a single confidence measure in a government unless climate change, there's a real credible climate plan that's made as a priority. I know that you've already commented on Andrew Scheer and his comments around gay marriage, but is there any sort of deal breaker that you see with perhaps the Liberal government that you would not be willing to prop up a single confidence motion?
I think it comes down to a question of priority. What I've seen so far with Mr. Trudeau is his priority is the wealthiest. I'll give you one example. In just the last year alone, he waived corporate loans to the tune of $6 billion. But over the past 4 years, he charged students he made profit off his students to the tune of $3 billion on student loans. I think that is a clear example of a bad choice. What I would do is, if there's choices that are being made that don't put people first, if there's choices that continue to give massive advantages to the powerful and wealthy, that's not something I support. If I could have decisions and choices that are made to help out people, that fight climate crisis, that invest in healthcare, that invest in housing, then it's something I could look at.
So there's no sort of single issue that stands out as a deal breaker for you in terms of being willing to work with a Liberal government?
I've made it really clear, and just to give you the contrast, I made it really clear with respect to Mr. Scheer, because of his cuts that he's going to impose on people, because of his position on not being clear on a woman's right to choose, something as basic as that, where there should be no debate, particularly no man should have any opinion on that. And finally, on his position on the rights of LGBTQ people to love who they love and to have same-sex marriage, I've made it really clear I would not support Mr. Scheer. I'm open to speaking with other parties if they want to support me in implementing our vision for pharmacare for all, or dental care coverage, or waiving immediately the interest on tuition fees for students that have federal loans. I'll be willing to work with them.
That's it, folks. That's time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks.